Bagaimana jika pekerjaanmu adalah bagian penting dari pekerjaan Allah di dunia? Bagaimana jika pekerjaanmu adalah sarana untuk mengasihi Dia dan menyatakan kasih-Nya kepada sesama? Faith and Work Conference 2026, Disciples at Work, Following Jesus in the Marketplace, Sabtu 16 Mei 2026. Mengundang setiap pengusaha dan profesional Kristen untuk mendapat inspirasi dan perspektif dalam melihat pekerjaan sebagai panggilan, ibadah, dan misi. Mengundang setiap pemimpin gereja untuk mendapat ide dan sarana dalam memuridkan jemaat di dunia kerja secara intensional. Mengundang setiap lembaga pelayanan dunia kerja untuk membangun network dan kolaborasi bagi Faith and Work Movement di Indonesia. Mari datang dan terhubung dengan komunitas yang sama-sama rindu mengintegrasikan iman dan pekerjaan. Jadilah bagian dari gerakan yang mengubah dunia kerja bagi kemuliaan Tuhan. Jangan lewatkan momen ini. Jadilah bagian dari gerakan yang membawa dampak dari ruang kerja Anda hingga ujung bumi.
Resource Global is committed to resourcing and releasing young Christian marketplace leaders from cities around the world.
And we believe that as we equip the young professionals, young marketplace leaders who are in different positions in different organizations and enterprises in this city, we will begin to see them transform this city through the gospel.
But one of the things that really stands out to me about Resource Global is that I also have partners in the gospel all over the world who are thinking the same thing. And so it becomes a network and a family beyond Chicago of emerging marketplace leaders who I can call on and pray with and think about how we can even collaborate in doing this work across our cities.
Setiap hari, jutaan orang Kristen melakukan pekerjaan mereka. Mereka mengurus toko, memimpin perusahaan, mengajar di sekolah, hingga mengelola kebun dan sawah. Tapi, apakah semua itu hanya tentang rutinitas mencari nafkah? Bagaimana jika pekerjaanmu adalah bagian penting dari pekerjaan Allah di dunia? Bagaimana jika pekerjaanmu adalah sarana untuk mengasihi Dia dan menyatakan kasih-Nya kepada sesama? Faith and Work Conference 2026, Disciples at Work, Following Sabtu 16 Mei 2026. Mengundang setiap pengusaha dan profesional Kristen untuk mendapat inspirasi dan perspektif dalam melihat pekerjaan sebagai panggilan, ibadah, dan misi. Mengundang setiap pemimpin gereja untuk mendapat ide dan sarana dalam memuridkan jemaat di dunia kerja secara intensional. Mengundang setiap lembaga pelayanan dunia kerja untuk membangun network dan kolaborasi bagi Faith and Work Movement di Indonesia. Mari datang dan terhubung dengan komunitas yang sama-sama rindu mengintegrasikan iman dan pekerjaan. Jadilah bagian dari gerakan yang mengubah dunia kerja bagi kemuliaan Tuhan. Jangan lewatkan momen ini. Jadilah bagian gerakan yang membawa dampak dari ruang kerja Anda hingga ujung bumi.
Resource Global is committed to resourcing and releasing young Christian marketplace leaders from cities around the world.
And we believe that as we equip the young professionals, young marketplace leaders who are in different positions in different organizations and enterprises in this city, we will begin to see them transform this city through the gospel.
But one of the things that really stands out to me about Resource Global is that I also have partners in the gospel all over the world who are thinking the same thing. And so it becomes a network and a family beyond Chicago of emerging marketplace leaders who I can call on and pray with and think about how we can even collaborate in doing this work across our cities.
Setiap hari, jutaan orang Kristen
All right, everyone. Hey, good morning, everyone. For those who are in Indonesia, thank you for having me on. My name is Tommy Lee. I am actually from Chicago, Illinois, over here in the US, but today I am in Baltimore in the hotel room, in the conference room, and it is an honor. It is an honor. I've come to love Indonesia. I've come to love all of you guys over Indonesia. You guys have taught me so much. Resource Global, I'm going to share a little bit more about Resource Global, but at the same time, it is an honor for me to be part of all of the different faith and work groups in Indonesia. We have been putting together some of these conferences. The pre-conference seminar series is part of the Faith and Work Conference 2026 events, the culmination of which will be held on site in Jakarta in May 16th of 2026. The pre-conference Faith and Work Seminar, this is the third of the series with the theme, A Faith Worth Living For, is a collaboration between the Theology of Work Project in Indonesia and Resource Global Indonesia. For those who are not familiar with Resource Global, the whole idea of Resource Global is that young Christian marketplace leaders are the catalyst for gospel growth in their cities. We believe that each one of you guys who are in their mid-20s, in their mid-30s, if we can help them learn what it means to integrate their faith in their work into what they do each and every single day, not only in their work, but their work in serving the church, their work in their family, as husbands, as spouses, as fathers, as friends, all of those things, if we can help them learn what it means to integrate that faith in their work, will they change a city? And so every single year, we hold an application process. We have an 8-month cohort. The Resource Global Indonesia team accepts about 15 to 20 people within the cohort. During that period of time, for about 8 months, they meet together once a month. They go through themes like gospel center identity, story, leadership, mission, faith and work. They're paired up with a mentor, ideally in their own industry. They also have what we call triad groups, where they meet with groups of 3, learning to be in accountability, sharing life together, keeping each other accountable. And then at the culmination, they work on what we call a gospel action plan. Similar to Nehemiah, who was in politics, a gospel action plan is when you look upon your city. What is a burden on your heart? What is a problem that you see in your city? And based upon how God has gifted you, how God is giving you strength or expertise, can you take all those skills to address that problem in the city? Indonesia is one of my favorite places. 10 years ago, we started in Jakarta, and that is our flagship city. We are now in 13 different global cities: Kuala Lumpur, Penang, Nairobi, Cluj, Romania, South Africa in Cape Town, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Sao Paulo, Brazil. We are just beginning work over in Tokyo, as well as I just got back from Cairo, Egypt as well too. So it has been an honor just to really be able to see where Resource Global is. Today, I am so honored. You're going to get to hear from Mark McLean, a new friend, and you're going to hear about his journey. You're going to hear some lessons learned. And before I do, I actually want to introduce someone who I am just meeting for the very first time, Dr. Harjanto. Please forgive me if I mess up your name. It is with due respect, Dr. Sutrisna Harjanto. Did I get this right, sir?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. It is an honor. I can't wait next time in Jakarta for me to meet you. And you're part of the Theology of Work Indonesia board member, and you are director of Bandung Theological Seminary. Professor, Doctor, it's good meeting you, sir.
Thank you. And very nice to meet you too. And
Yeah.
all the Resource Global team. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Would you be able to open us up in prayer?
Okay. Shall we pray? Our Heavenly Father, we are very grateful for this wonderful opportunity today that our brothers and sisters from the Resource Global team come to share with us insights and invaluable experiences we pray for your blessings for all the presentation and the conversations today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Looking forward to meeting you soon.
You too. See you. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'm going to bring in over Mark McLean over in Austin, Texas. And so, Mark, welcome to this. I'm so honored to introduce you to the Indonesia folks. And so I hope one day you'll meet them in person. But Mark, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tommy. It is my pleasure to join the folks in Jakarta, and I have not had the chance to be there. I have many friends who have been there many times, but I've not had a chance to get there. Our company is global, and we have people in Indonesia, but I have not had a chance to be there.
Yeah. Hey, honestly, Mark, who would have thought a breakfast that you and I had in Austin sometime last year? Now, suddenly I got you roped into speaking to this wonderful group here in Jakarta.
Well, I turned out to be fairly free at 9:30 p.m. on a Friday night, so it worked out beautifully for me.
Mark, I'm going to have you, for those who are just here joining in, we're going to have Mark speak for about 20 minutes, and then from that point, we're going to do about 15 minutes Q&A. Mark, I could sit here and read your bio, but you are the CEO of and founder of SailPoint Technology. You are one of the rare individuals that has taken a company private to private, and back to public again. How would you describe, one, what SailPoint Technologies does, and two, for those who are new, why did you take your company private to public again? How would you describe all of this process and what you're doing?
I will tell the briefest possible version so we don't spend our whole 20 minutes on that 20-year journey. But we were a venture capital backed business. We're in the enterprise security market, which means we build technology that very large corporations around the globe use to protect their information and their data. It's for those of us that deal with accounts and passwords on our computers. If you think of the challenge of a typical enterprise that has tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of employees and thousands of business applications, all of which have very complex data structures and what we call entitlements, keeping track of all of that to make sure the right people, and now with AI and agents, the right technology people, like non-human identities, to make sure all those identities can access the right data at all times and protect it from the bad actors accessing the data. That's what our technology does. And we work with about half of the global 500, of the Fortune 500, about a quarter of the global 2,000 largest companies in the world. So it's a very large business. In US dollars, we crossed over $1 billion in revenue in our last quarter, have about 4,000 employees around the globe. And I've had the privilege of leading it since there were 3 of us in a room with a whiteboard.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, Mark, I am so honored. You're going to teach for about 20 minutes. I'm going to disappear and I'm going to come back and then do some Q&A. And for those guys who are just watching, I would love your questions. Please, as you're listening to Mark, what is the question that comes to mind? And then from that point on, if it's even writing in Bahasa, there will be someone who will be translating to that. So, Mark, I'll be back.
Okay, Tommy. Well, I'm honored again to spend time with all of you. I know this is a pretty large group of people who are interested in the concept of faith at work. And in my journey, I've prior to founding this company with some friends and running it for now 2 decades, my first 10 years of my career was classic corporate environment. So I worked for IBM Corporation, I worked for HP or Hewlett Packard Corporation, and I was not particularly interested in an entrepreneurial journey. I thought I was going to build a corporate career, and through a series of circumstances, a chance of taking a new opportunity that moved me from California to Austin, Texas. There's a bit of a tragic story in there. My mother passed away fairly early when I was about 32 and she was in her 50s. And I'm not sure I would have chosen for my family to leave where we had always lived in California. And that opened doors that might not have seemed possible later when I moved to Texas. And had this very interesting journey of founding one technology company around 2000. And then it went for a few years and we were sold to a big tech company called Sun. and then started this company 2 decades ago. And to kind of bring it to what has this meant in my faith marketplace journey, I'd like to maybe share some of the key learnings that I've experienced. And as Tommy said, be glad to maybe talk about anything and everything you think is a challenging thing as a Christian in the marketplace. I think we are in a time where it's becoming more prevalent for Christian leaders in the marketplace to be open about their faith. I think many of us recognize that in some ways it's more challenging sometimes to get people to come with us to church, whereas they will work with us. And if we share who we are as Christ followers at work, often that leads to interesting conversations. So I guess in my leadership journey as a CEO for a long time now, again, from an organization that went from 3 people to almost 4,000 people, it's been quite an amazing journey. I've learned a few key things along the way. I think that's critical for any of us, whether we're like an individual contributor early in our careers or mid-stage, moderate manager level, maybe in a company, or an executive, what we would call C-suite here, right? CFO or CEO or one of those leadership roles. I think one of the key things as a believer in the marketplace is the word intentionality, right? You're not going to accidentally be good at your faith at work. You're going to have to make some choices and be intentional about how you're going to show up in the marketplace as a believer. And I think especially if we're in some sort of a leadership role, I think we have this challenge of wanting to show up as the kind of person who is both committed to a successful business organization. We go into business to build successful businesses, right? And those businesses serve some marketplace. We bring products and services to that marketplace. And importantly, we create some sort of a culture inside our organization. And I think as believers, we have the opportunity to build a culture that honors and values people, no matter what kind of business we lead. And over the years, having always had a small subset of Christians who work for our corporation, but many, many more people who are not necessarily following Christ. And by the way, our company operates in about 30 countries. We serve customers in about 60 countries. So we have customers on every continent. I have employees on every continent from many religious backgrounds. Not nearly everyone that works at SailPoint is a Christian. We have Muslim employees and Jewish employees and Hindu employees in India. So we feel like our mission is to do great work for our customers, to create a culture and environment that welcomes people, and then to ensure that we have the opportunity for people to express who they are at work. And for those of us that are Christians, I want to create an environment so those people can say, this is who I am. This is the way I live my life. And so in that learning over time, I've learned that one of the things we can do as leaders is to create a culture, again, that values people, and that particularly means kind of how we expect people to show up at work. There's a phrase, I'm sure it's common in Jakarta, the way it is in the United States, which is work-life balance, right? People think, I'd like to have a work environment where I can work hard and do good work, and also not work so many hours that I don't have a good life, that I don't have time for my family, my spouse, or my children, or to take care of my parents, or to stay healthy by eating right and sleeping and exercising, right? And importantly, for people of faith, the ability to be involved in our faith community, our church, to serve in our community, right? And so we're always talking about this work-life balance. But one of the things I learned along the way that I've tried to stress in conversations with people is that's, if you picture like a pie chart, a circle with segments of your life. And sometimes people think, I want to achieve work-life balance. And if you think that's some kind of static, perfect pie chart, right, where 20% of my life is on my family, and 15% is on my church, and 70% is at my work, or whatever your pie chart would look like, I tell people that's not realistic, right? Realistically, there's going to always be some imbalances. Sometimes work is very demanding. Sometimes we have a sick child or sick spouse and we have to take care of them, and that's demanding. Sometimes our own health suffers. Or I like to say, a few years ago during COVID-19, we all had a crisis all at once. And so how do we navigate those difficult times? And I think the trick is to always think about this temporary imbalance that you're wrestling with, but to try to stay in a healthy state. In other words, to get focused on our faith and our family and our work in such a way that nothing ever gets wildly out of balance. It might be temporarily out of balance. And again, that comes from intentionality. Another big concept that we talk a lot about at work is to attract and retain the right kind of people. And so often when we're talking about bringing in employees into our environment, or if you're a manager and have the opportunity to do hiring in your company, we talk a lot about some concepts that I actually gleaned from another book of an author named Patrick Lencioni. The book is called The Ideal Team Player. And we talk about what are the characteristics of the kinds of people we want to bring in. Ideally, fellow believers, but sometimes the right person for the job might not be a Christian in our organization. But what are the kinds of people? And I like to use his simple acronym or a simple metaphor of humble, hungry, and smart. We want to hire and retain people who demonstrate humility. Now, when we're dealing with Christians in the marketplace, we can be very explicit that humility comes from our posture as Christians. We follow Christ, who was incredibly humble, as it says in Philippians. He gave up his own, honor and sovereignty in heaven to come down to earth and served as a humble servant among us to model that for us. Even when we're not dealing with Christians at work, though, there's an attractiveness of leaders who are humble, who are willing to admit their mistakes, who are willing to admit they have more things to learn, especially in a rapidly evolving technology environment like we're living in today. Hungry is the idea of growth, right? Like, we want to be ambitious, but ambitious in a good and healthy way. We want to learn and grow together. We want to learn and grow and bring our teammates and colleagues along with us so that the entire organization, the team we're on, can get better and better. And smart is both the idea of obviously intelligence as we've normally measured it, IQ perhaps, but also the idea of what we call emotional intelligence. Is this the kind of person who can work well with other colleagues and teammates? So this simple three-part idea of humble, hungry, and smart says we want to, as believers, explicitly define that our approach to working humble, hungry, and smart comes from our faith. We choose to be humble because we're trying to follow after Christ, who was the most humble human who ever lived, yet he was God in the flesh. We're hungry because we're trying to learn and get better because we want to help our organizations get better. We want to help our teams get better. No one wants employees who are just coasting and just trying to get through the day without learning anything. And lastly, that value of smart as measured by emotional intelligence, that's just a reminder that all of us today work almost all the time in teams, right? If you're in any kind of a team, any kind of an organization, it's not just about what you can do, it's about what that team can do together. So humble, hungry, smart is a simple way to reinforce with my leadership team and all the teams that they lead around the globe. Those are the kind of people we want to find and hold on to. And when we get someone in the organization who doesn't fit that as well, usually we find it difficult and sometimes we have to part ways with those people. So humble, hungry, and smart is a simple metaphor. And it's related to a term some of you may have read in another book that was famous a few years ago called Strengths Finders. And the idea of that book was to figure out where we're gifted. As Christians, we would say where we're gifted by God and what we can do. And these concepts tie together because one of the things about understanding your own strengths as a leader or whatever your gifts in the marketplace might be, are you a salesperson or a technical development innovator? Are you a creative, artistic person? God's endowed each of us with various kinds of gifts that way. Well, the secret to building a great organization is to have complementary gifts. So I like to say often the success of a team is understanding what God's gifted us to do and ensuring we surround ourselves with teammates who are good at the things we're not, and vice versa. For those of you that are familiar with the Microsoft tools, I sometimes jokingly say, look, you're probably not great at PowerPoint, Word, and Excel. You might be good at 2 out of 3, right? But at the end of the day, you want to learn what you're really gifted at, develop that as best you can based on how God's blessed you, and then surround yourself with colleagues and teammates who are good at the other things in the market. And that's where the humility comes in again. I'm humble enough to admit that I'm not good at these things. I need teammates and colleagues who can help me there while I can bring my gifts, my skills to the environment. And I guess I'll just sum it up, Tommy, here for a few minutes so we can have plenty of time for questions. because I could talk much more about how I've approached leadership and how I approach building teams and various other things. But I think probably the concept that's even in the secular world today, but obviously I think it really dates back to Jesus, who kind of changed the definition of leadership, right? Prior to Jesus, there wasn't much humble leadership ever, right? If you were a leader, you were a king or a dictator who absolutely ruled over people, destroyed your enemies, usually didn't tolerate any sort of dissension. And then Christ comes along and says, there's a different way to lead. He who wants to be great among you must serve, right? That was a completely radical concept. And yet today, we often see that in the marketplace, the most admired leaders are those who are highly accomplished, yet humble, willing to admit their own faults, their own shortcomings, their need for others to succeed. And that's the way I've chosen to lead, and I think that's the way we are called to lead in the marketplace. Again, if you're early in your career, you're building those leadership strengths, you're trying to model yourself after leaders, there's no better model than Christ. But in our own workplace environment, how can we show those characteristics of humility and desire to learn and get better, and the desire to work well with our teammates? And so I think that servant mindset, that servant leadership mindset, that's why I like the humble, hungry, smart, simple phraseology, because it reminds me that's how that looks at work. If I'm going to bring Christ mindset into the workplace, I'm going to show up humble. I'm going to admit that I need others around me who are good at things that I'm not, and vice versa. I'm going to keep trying to learn and grow. I warn people that have my color hair, don't get comfortable. Don't stop learning and believe that you already know everything you need to know about engineering or marketing or sales. I always say you don't, because these fields keep evolving and changing. We have to learn and grow and bring our teammates along with us. And just that idea that we recognize the need for each other in the workplace. And I think whether you can explicitly call those out as Christian values or not, I think when we live with those values, it will feel different. It will feel unusual often in the marketplace. And our non-Christian colleagues will often ask us, why do you do things that way? Why do you operate differently? And that's often when we have the chance to explain to them that it's our faith, it's our belief system and what Christ taught us that helps us to operate that way in the marketplace. So, Tommy, I just wanted to kind of throw some of those ideas out, what I've learned. I always like to say when you start from zero and you get to where SailPoint is today at $1 billion, you think, oh, it's been a great, easy, up and to the right journey. And I say, absolutely not. Right? There's been stops and starts. The company had a really tough period where we almost sold the business at one point, and that didn't happen. I almost got fired by my board at that time. I like to tell people, when you see this level of quote success, you go, oh, this must have been amazingly great journey all the time. And I say, not at all, right? There's been all kinds of hardships and all kinds of difficulties. And because I don't allow my ego, my identity to be defined by the business, I choose to say, I'm going to do the best I can as long as the Lord allows me to lead this business. And if it's ever not the right thing, I'll leave the business and let another one lead it and try to see where else I'm being called next. So that mindset of humility and openness is, I think, also key for us. So let me stop there, Tommy. That's a lot of things to chew on, so we can maybe pick up some questions and go from there.
Yeah, hey, seriously, a lot of times, please send me some of your questions. Love to have that dialogue with Mark. I also have a whole bunch of different questions. I'm going to kick us off. Mark, you mentioned a lot of times your identity. As the company started to grow, and some of you guys who are here are very successful people. How do you allow yourself, or how do you not allow yourself to allow your identity to be embedded in your company and the success of your company?
Well, I think that's where we have to look at that Philippians passage about Christ. Like, this is God in the flesh, and he chooses not to, quote, behave as God. He chooses to show up and serve, right? And it just reminds me, we can get enamored with our titles or our accolades, our achievements, and say, oh, this is who I am. I'm a famous CEO, or I'm a successful, leader, or I've built this big company or this big thing. It's really our choice as to how we define ourselves, right? And in my case, I think the way you avoid that, Tommy, 2 or 3 key things. One is marry well. Make sure you have a wonderful spouse who's going to help you keep grounded. I also think it's very important the kind of friendships we have. And there are wonderful organizations. I happen to be a member of a thing called C12. I know C12 has some pretty strong presence in Indonesia. It's a Christian CEO network. So whether you're a CEO or at other levels of the organization, and part of what you all are doing with this Faith and Work conference, having fellow believers who can be accountable with us, help us learn and grow, but also ensure that we don't let our egos go out of control. I have some wonderful brothers and sisters in C12, and if I start to sound like I'm thinking I'm kind of a big deal, they'll remind me that I'm just doing my part. God's blessed me with this role. I'm going to serve as well as I can in this role. And as the famous mission person from the Moravians said, our calling in life from God is to love others, preach the gospel, die, and be forgotten. It's not very invigorating, but that's kind of the truth. Most of us will live that life. God will remember us. We will be rewarded. But on earth, most of us will not be remembered 100 years after we're gone. And that's just very realistic and humbling, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I'm going to do, David, it talks about served God in his generation, served God's purpose in his generation. Like David was a pretty big deal. We still talk about David, but when they're summarizing David's life, King David, they just say he served God's purposes in generation and then he died. That's kind of all we're all supposed to do. Serve our purpose, live the way God's called us to live, move into the next life.
Yeah. Just so you know, for those who are just jumping on, a lot of times you're going to be able to see the rerun from YouTube, and we'll send out the link to everyone that's they're just watching. Mark, I got one question. In multi-faith teams, how can leaders share about Jesus without giving the impression we are pushing out faith?
Such a good question. Very interesting evolution in the marketplace. Now, I've got the gray hair thing, so I've been in the marketplace about 4 decades. And I would say when I was entering the marketplace in the 1980s, I know some of you out there probably weren't born at that time. It really wasn't very acceptable in a lot of situations to bring up your faith, and so how to do that was very challenging. I used to, in those days, I would mention that my family and I had gone to church, and if someone was like, "Oh, you go to church? Tell me about that." That kind of gave you an open door. You would also often find other other believers that way. "Oh, I was at church too this Sunday. Where were you?" Right? So we would find each other. In other settings, I think as you have non-believers, right, around you in the workplace, non-Christians, and particularly those not just not Christian and not anything, but maybe strong other faith, Muslim, Hindu, various other types of Buddhist, other faiths. I think what those people are looking for when they meet Christians is, are you going to judge me and put me down? Are you going to treat me differently? So what I love is that over the course of these many years, I've, about 400 people in India, most of whom are Hindu. I have 100 people in Israel, most of whom practice the Jewish faith, if any faith. I have a lot of folks in America who are all over the map, from some faith to little faith to no faith to confused about their faith. And what we try to ensure we do, some of my key leaders and I, is like, we want those people to all feel valued. We want them to feel that their work has dignity and that we care about them, right? You've often heard the phrase, people don't care how much you know until they know that you care, right? That applies to us as leaders at work. If they think we care about them as people, then at least we have the opportunity to explain where that's coming from, how our faith and our commitment to follow God causes us to love God and love others, the greatest commandment, right? So love God and love others. So, okay, got it. And how do I do that? Well, I treat those people with love and care and dignity. It doesn't mean we don't fire people. Sometimes people get confused, like, "Oh, you're Christians, you can't fire people." I'm like, "So are you saying if you join my company, you have lifetime employment?" That's not how it works, right? If we have to be able to run the business well and hold people to an accountable, good performance, but we also have to make sure we always treat people, no matter what their beliefs, no matter what kind of viewpoint they have, with dignity and respect and love. And when you do that, you have opportunities to talk about your faith. That's what I've learned over the years. I can't blast them with a gospel presentation at work. That's technically illegal in America. But but I can be who I am, and it often leads to a conversation about why I approach things the way I do.
Yeah. And part of that conversation, Mark, wouldn't you say, is also listening? If you find out that they have a certain hobby or a certain, hey, tell me a little bit about your faith. I would love to learn. And the very fact that you are treating them is so important, what they have to say is important, speaks volumes to them.
It does. Again, if you say, when people feel like they are, as we say in the US, at least a cog in the machine, like I'm just a widget in the machine, and if I leave, you'll put some other widget in the machine. Like if they feel like that, if they feel like they're a replaceable part, you're not going to get their heart. They're not going to do their best work. They'll show up and do what they need to do and go home, right? But if they feel like you care about them and you're looking to help them grow and learn and get better and have opportunity, then I think they're going to often show up and give you their best. And so we try to make sure everyone feels like we care about you and we want you to do your best, but not, and I say this a lot, Tommy, and this is unusual coming from a CEO of a fast growing tech company. I'm like, I don't want you to work too hard. I want you to work hard, and I want you to make sure you don't screw up your life. You don't screw up your family. You don't screw up your health. I want you to make sure you're living in such a way that you're doing good work and you have a good life, right? I literally say, I didn't set out to build the most successful company, period. Set out to build a very successful company and make sure that the people work there felt valued. Those are two objectives that you have to hold together if you want to achieve them.
All right, here's another question. Mark, as Christians, how should we deal with disappointment at work? For instance, here's an example, is a lot of times you mentioned humility. What happens when our humility is perceived as weakness in a work environment, or a lot of times all of our hard work bears no results or fruit? How would you describe, how would you deal with those two situations?
Oh, yeah, these are great questions. Look, on the first one, and I have experienced the first one. Let's make sure we hit both of these. So this idea that if you show up as a nice person, as a humble person, you will be viewed as weak. And I've heard that a lot over the years. And look, depending on what kind of business you're building, if you're building your own homegrown family business versus maybe the kind of business where you venture capital or others have put funding into the business, at some level it is, who do you answer to? Like there's a thing there of who you answer to, and in this humility question, because what I've learned, again, our company was venture capital backed, private equity backed. We went public, so that's called institutionally backed, right? All these shareholders out in the public stock markets, et cetera. My view has been those kinds of investors don't care what you say about your faith as long as you deliver great results. So there really is a sense of job one for us as Christians in the marketplace truly is to do a great job. It is to do great work, build great products, do everything we can to solve the needs of our customers with the product or service we're delivering. Because if you don't do that, if you don't have excellent work, you're not going to have a successful business. So no matter how much you want to treat the market well or treat your employees well, your business will die. So that doesn't help. So we have to do excellent work. We have to have a strong business, right? But what people often misunderstand is if you're a nice person, a humble person, you won't build a successful business. That's what they think. And it's just absolutely not true. And I've learned the only way to prove it's not true is to demonstrate it. Like, I'm going to treat people well, and we're going to be a very strong business. And when you do that, it starts to change people's thinking that these things are somehow incompatible. So, Tommy, I think we show up and do great work. We hire great people. We build great products. We do those kind of things that others do while not sacrificing how we treat our people. And if you don't let either one get out of balance, this is how it works. That's what I think. What was the second question, Tommy? The other part?
The second one, a lot of times, actually, I bet you a lot of times, a lot of the Asians in the room, most of us, will feel this way. What happens when it feels like all of our hard work seems to bear no results or fruit? Mark, here's a good example. A lot of times, as an Asian, my parents always taught me, put your head down, work hard, and people will see it and reward you. And I realized after a while, I put my head down and work hard, and I don't brag about myself, but I didn't get the credit. And so how do you deal with all of that stuff when your hard work bears no results, no fruit?
Yeah, this is why I joke that that book right before, right after Psalms in the Bible is not called Promises, it's called Proverbs, right? In other words, what we learn in the book of Proverbs is there are a lot of things in life that are generally true, but they're not guaranteed. That's the difference between a proverb and a promise. So reread all over in Proverbs, advice that's as good today as it was 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago about business. Like the hard worker will reap more fruit, the lazy worker will starve. I mean, there's a bunch of very basic stuff in Proverbs that turns out to be very true, right? But as you said, Tommy, then there's Job, who worked hard and did really great, and all of a sudden everything went away. So I think Job's in the Bible to remind us that there isn't a straight line from hard work automatically equals reward, right? So then I think we as Christians have to go, well, what am I supposed to do with that? And I think if you really thread this through the reading of scripture end to end, what we're called to is obedience. We're not responsible for the results, God is. We're called to do what he calls us to do, to live the way he calls us to live. So hardworking, diligent workers, generally speaking, will ultimately see results, but not always. So then we have to face, well, if I didn't get those results, does God not love me? Or did something else go wrong? And the answer is no. This is a broken world we live in. Sometimes you do really hard work and do good things, and it doesn't turn out right. And we also see the wicked prosper. David and others struggled with that. Why are the wicked prospering? Well, we can't always explain what God allows and why he allows it. But generally speaking, if we're obedient to his word and live the way he calls us to live, humbly, diligently, treating others with love and respect and all of that, it generally will work out well. But we can't hold God to that as a promise because there's too much evidence that God sometimes allows us to not succeed or have setbacks and failures, or someone's spouse gets sick and you're like, why did God allow that to happen? The answer is, I don't know. I mentioned very briefly, I lost my mom pretty early to cancer, and I had to wrestle with why did God allow that to happen? And I always talk about Romans 8:28 is one of very few very important verses to me. It doesn't say everything that happens is good. It says God works all things together for good for those that love God. So part of my story of coming to Texas and getting involved in entrepreneurship and building this wonderful, big, successful company is I don't think any of that happens if my mom doesn't die. Because if my mom didn't die, I probably never left California. And maybe I would have had some other kind of success, quote unquote, worldly success. But I look back and say, it's not good at all that my mom died kind of early. But God worked some good out of that. And I learned to trust that God will often work good things out, but we can't see them at the time. We can only see them looking backward. And so when things don't go well, when we don't get the results from the hard work, you have to say, I'm going to trust God and keep moving forward.
And can I ask, say one tangible thing for you to comment on? As a CEO of a fairly successful company, you just can't pay attention to all the employees. You're just not paying attention. And so sometimes the employees actually have to do a good job of learning how to communicate. Not brag, no one wants to be the arrogant person. But somehow or another, you have to learn how to communicate, whether it's email updates, all of those things. And so sometimes the key thing is learning how to communicate in order to show
Are
the
you
job
talking,
that you're doing.
Tommy, from me to those people or for those people to communicate the good work they're doing?
Yes, the people communicate the good work to sometimes their bosses.
Okay, so let me, I'm glad I'm clarified because I'm going to share a piece of advice with you I got from a wonderful mentor when I was young who was not a Christian, but he was really smart and a wise and good person at work. And Ed told me this, he's been passed for many years now, Ed, but Ed said, here's my best advice about how to balance good work and your career planning. He said it's a 90-10 rule. He said, you want to spend about 90% of your time doing really good work and about 10% kind of promoting yourself, networking, looking for future opportunities. And here's why that's probably about the right percentage. If you spend 100% of your time doing great work, but never talk to others about it, make sure you get some credit when it's appropriate,
Yeah.
Make connections with networks. You'll probably stay in the same job and do a really good job your whole career, but you'll never get promoted. You'll never go on to do other things, et cetera, et cetera. And Tommy, if you go the other way, 80-20, if you spend only 80% of your time doing a good job and about 20% trying to promote yourself, you won't do a very good job. Because with only about 80% of your focus on your job, you probably won't do that great a job compared to the guy who's working 90 or 95% on the job. I've stuck with that and I've shared that with so many young people. Like, look, most of your time and energy should be on doing great work. And back to Proverbs, most of the time that will work out. But some of the time you need to make sure you're meeting the right people and getting making sure people appreciate the work you did. You can't brag about it, but you
Yeah.
can't stay quiet such that you never get that credit. So how to do that well? You just kind of humbly make sure people know what you did, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of tricky sometimes, but I think that's the right balance.
Mark, that was great. For those who are listening to it, a lot of times I know we talk about the theology of faith and work and all of those things, but one of the things that we want to do for this session with Mark, and you're going to hear that from Marissa and Julia, is tangible things that you apply in your workplace. Here's another one, Mark, is how do you balance in the marketplace between excellence but still being grounded? For instance, not letting ambition take our focus and separate us from God versus not being too chill and comfortable and keep learning.
Yeah. Look, I think, there's a reason we have to, matter of fact, Patrick Lencioni in that book, The Humble, Hungry, Smart Thoughts, which is, again, just to make sure people hear it, the name of the book is The Ideal Team Player. That's the name of the book if they want to look it up on Amazon or something. But he points about healthy ambition. I like to say there's two things that are not healthy ambition. Unhealthy ambition and lack of ambition, right? Unhealthy ambition is, oh yeah, I want to go places, I want to grow and learn and do things, and I will crush anyone who gets in my way, right? I like to say this is the kind of guy who won't just shoot at the competition, he'll shoot at the guy in the next cubicle. He doesn't care who's in his way, whether they work for this same company or another company, he's going to win. And then the other kind of person, like you said, is too chill and doesn't have ambition and just thinks, I'm just going to coast along. So again, so much of life I like to feel like is kind of these guardrails, like don't go too far this way, don't go too far that way. And on this one, I think that the right approach is like you want to learn and grow. You want to share what you learn and grow with others so they can grow with you. The whole team can get better, but you don't want to try to crush and out compete others by being unfair or unkind to them, but you also don't want to just coast and not get better because that's not what God calls us to do. We're supposed to grow and learn and mature. Like I don't think God thinks he condemns the guy who buries his talent, right? We all in the workplace, I think we love the parable of the talents, right? Because I like to say that's the performance review parable. What does God say at the end? Well done, good and faithful servant. That's a performance review. That's what you just heard, right? So he's saying, I want you to do these kind of things. Go out there, work hard, put my resources, your talents to work. And he condemns the guy who's lazy and just buries his talent. So, and in Proverbs, lots of negative words for the sluggard, for the guy who doesn't get out of bed and doesn't work hard. And so, I mean, we see pretty clear messages, I think, throughout Scripture on God expects us to work hard, not to work obsessively, so we get out of balance and we don't have a good family life and we screw up our health. But we have to work in such a way that we can and grow and be ambitious, but not in a way that sacrifices our witness for Christ.
Correct. Thank you. We have time for one more question before our 11:15 mark comes, 10:15 mark goes up. This is actually from someone who is 60 years old. Mark,
that's a young person to me.
What is your encouragement as a 60-year-old? I am having a hard time finding a job because they don't hire people like me anymore. What words of advice would you give to someone who is older?
Well, I think some places don't hire, and that's a little, well, I can't speak to Jakarta, okay? In America, we're seeing a little swing back from that because on the one hand, people want modern, young people that grew up on the internet, the web, mobile computing, whatever modern technology, right? But then there's kind of this balance now of people saying, but you need wisdom. And wisdom is different than knowledge. That same guy, Ed, had a wonderful phrase like, never confuse 20 years of experience with 1 year of experience repeated 20 times, right? Like, are you learning and growing and of course, your career, or are you just doing the same thing over and over? So I think at 60, what you have to be able to articulate is here's the wisdom. Here's what I have learned about my field, my industry that I can convey and help people and partly just be a good, diligent worker. I think sometimes people look at someone 60, white hair, and go, oh, what can they contribute? And the answer is tons. You can contribute tons. You have to show up and work hard, but you have wisdom generally. You've hopefully learned many things over the years that you can share with those who've only been in the workforce for a short time.
Yeah, very, very good. Mark, you hit it right at the 15 mark. So thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
It was a pleasure. I'm so honored to join this group of people. Thank you for pursuing faith in the marketplace on the other side of the world where we are literally 12 hours apart from each other. So while you're getting into your day, I'm going to bed. But it's been wonderful to spend time with all of you. And thank you for the opportunity, Tommy. And I wish you all blessings and may God richly bless your work as you're serving him in the market.
Mark, before you go, the next thing is they do want to do a group picture with you on there before you jump off. And you know I'm going to be
okay.
asking the question, when will you be joining me in Jakarta? Because I go there about 2 or 3 times a year and would love for you to be there with me one day.
I have a team that is mad at me of all the places that our own team has places that I haven't been to yet. So I did make it to Seoul and Singapore last year, and I'm supposed to go to Tokyo and Sydney this year. Still haven't got a plan to get to Jakarta yet, because I have to also go to London and Germany and other places we have teams, and then I occasionally have to be home because my wife likes it if I'm not gone all the time. She likes it if I'm
Yeah.
gone some of the time. So,
Oh my
but yeah,
gosh,
no, I'd
Mark,
be
thank
honored
you
to take a
so
picture.
much.
This is like a virtual Zoom selfie, I guess. What are we doing here? I don't know how this works.
Yes, Anne, what do you want to do? Or Anne, how would you
Well,
like to do this picture here?
I'll let you know later the technicality, but for now I will take the pictures of everyone. Mark,
Oh,
thank you so
okay.
much for your talk and for everything that you shared. I will speak in
Pleasure.
bahasa Indonesia, guys. Bapak Ibu, boleh minta tolong untuk dinyalakan kameranya. Juga boleh kalau yang bisa ganti backgroundnya, boleh diganti juga. Kita akan foto bersama. Saya akan ambil fotonya 2 kali ya, karena ada banyak orang di sini, jadi nanti saya akan ambil 2 layar yang berbeda. Saya tunggu mungkin sekitar 30 detik lagi untuk teman-teman yang belum buka kameranya, boleh dibuka. Kita akan foto bersama sebelum kita lanjut ke break selanjutnya ya. Oke, ini sepertinya sudah mulai pada buka. Saya akan mulai ambil fotonya ya. Oke, Bapak Ibu, udah semuanya? Oke. Oke, the first slide, oke? 3, 2, sebentar ya. 3, 2, 1. Smile, everyone. All right. One more. Two more. Sorry. That was like the notification coming in. It was not good. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Okay, one more. Sorry. Suddenly, like when everyone is opening the camera, the participant is rising up. Okay. All right. All good. All good,
Thank
Tommy.
you, Mark. We'll talk soon. Have a good night, Mark.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much,
everyone.
Mark.
Blessings. Thank you all. Blessings. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, for those who are joining, a lot of times, one of the things I love about Resource Global is the different voices. Is you have people who are in the ministry, you have people in seminary, you have people who are professors, you have marketplace leaders, engineers, finance, entrepreneur, family business owners. I think when we begin to hear the voices of all of these individuals, what is God saying to us? How are we learning through some of those different things? And then from that point on, for me in Chicago, coming from America, I have learned so much from the people of Indonesia. You guys have taught me so much about faith. You guys have taught me so much about community, all of those things. And another thing that I love is I get a chance to hear from younger people, but more so, I love the female voices of the female leaders around the world. I get a chance to talk now to two wonderful people who I love dearly, who they are my role models. I learned so much from. And for many of you guys who are on there, one of the things that is so important is we need more female leaders, female voices around the world to teach us. And I get a chance to sit under their leadership and their teaching all the time. And so with that said, Marissa, Julie, you're stuck with me for the next 30, 40 minutes here. How are you guys?
Great, thank you. Good to see you. Can you hear me okay?
You, Tommy.
Yes.
Good.
Well, hey, Marissa, I'm going to start with you. You're currently in Singapore, but you're back and forth to and from Jakarta and Singapore, all of those things. And then occasionally I get to see you in the US. Describe a little bit of what your role is and what you do day to day.
Sure, yes. So I have the privilege of being able to work in the clothing supply chain, which is interesting because what that means is we have factories in Indonesia and we work with factories in a few other countries. And the thing about making clothing is it's a lot of labor that is needed. So over the years, this company, it was actually started by my father and his brothers, and it's been around now for 50 years. There are over 30,000 people, mostly Indonesians, who work there. And so as a Christian, I feel really honored and privileged that God has built this up and that I get to be a part of it. Right now, my role is more of a board role. So I'm a part of the supervisory team that kind of oversees the overall strategy, major investments, the key people that we hire. And so that is what my main focus is. And then I also get to help out with Resource Global here and there whenever Tommy needs a hand. So thank you, Tommy.
Yeah. Marissa was part of our very first cohort. And then from that point on, she is currently on our board and she's one of our speakers now. Marissa, what did you think that you were going to do when you were at the university and you're in college? What was your goal, or what compared to what you're doing now?
That's a great question. I studied engineering when I was in college. So I really loved math and science, and I had grown up in Indonesia, but my mother is from the US. And so I ended up having a lot of American friends. And most of my American friends' parents were engineers in Indonesia. They were working in the oil fields. And so I thought, okay, well, if I ever want to live overseas, maybe I should be an engineer. That was kind of my thought process. And then as I got into it, I realized, oh, okay, I do like problem solving, but I also like working with people, not just kind of mechanical problems or machinery, but I like working with people. And so I started to get into business. And at the time, I think I was still trying to figure out my faith. My mom had taught me about the Lord, and I had gone to church as a child, but I didn't quite accept faith fully for myself. So during my university years, I was working that out. And one of the last things I surrendered to God was making money. So I really wanted to get the highest paying job. And I found out that back then in 2007, 2008, one of the best paying jobs was to be a banker, an investment banker. So I got a job in New York City at a place called Lehman Brothers, and I can tell you more about that story. But I went from engineering to finance, and then now I'm in the clothing supply chain. So it has not been a journey that made sense always at the time, kind of like Mark was saying. But looking back, I can see how God has connected all the dots and fused all of these life experiences for my good and for His glory.
Yeah, very good. Julie, I'm going to bring you on a little bit. Share a little bit about what your role and what you're currently working on with all the different ventures that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for having me, everyone. Currently, I'm helping my family business. We're operating in the maritime industry, and that's mostly in Kalimantan, specifically charter vessels, barges for the oil fields. It's a family business that my father started about 15, 20 years ago. And I work specifically in the HR division. Concurrently, I'm also helping Yayasan, an NGO, a medical NGO called doctorSHARE or Yayasan Dokter Peduli. And I think most of you might know the floating hospitals that Dr. Lee Darmawan started. It's basically the same yayasan, and currently serving as a board member in the NGO. And I'm also helping with Resource Global in development. So yeah.
Hey, look, everyone, two of my favorite people is when you find wonderful people, you just find some way to bring them on. And one of my greatest joys is seeing both Marissa as well as Julia, not only just speakers in Jakarta, but a lot of times in all over the world, in all of our different networks. And I am so proud of them, and I love them so dearly. And Julia, a lot of times you talked about Yaya's son, doctorSHARE. Share a little bit about the work and how you got involved in doctorSHARE and what it's doing right now.
Yeah, the short version, yeah, tell me. Well, I mean, for one, it's not my background to be, in a medical nonprofit. I am definitely no doctor, not an engineer like Marissa. I actually studied art and design and entrepreneurship in my time in studies in University of Michigan. That is also how I came to know my faith during college. My family is still Buddhist, mostly. But long story short, we encountered doctorSHARE's work because my father fell very sick when I was working in New York soon after graduation. And my father had accidentally seen an interview on Kick Andy. For those of you here in Indonesia, I'm sure you guys know Kick Andy punya wawancara. They highlight very prominent figures in Indonesia. And Dr. Lee Darmawan was receiving an award for Hero of the Year that year. And he was sharing about, the very dire conditions in remote island healthcare, where if people are literally sick, there's nowhere to go. We're very privileged in Jakarta to have medical care literally a drive away, but this is not the case for most people living in the remote areas of Indonesia. And my father, who was sick at that time, basically encountered this interview and felt so burdened, the fact that he was sick, but at least he had help. But what about all those people who obviously don't have that kind of privilege? And that's, again, not Africa, people who are experiencing malnutrition. This is not somewhere far. This is literally in our backyard, in our home nation. And long story short, he really wanted to find Dr. Lee and have a way to help him, because the floating hospitals do have a correlation to our maritime family business. Long story short, we got involved because, God really just burdened my heart to come back to Indonesia and partake in this work by building another floating hospital, a bigger one than that Dr. Lee had started. And so we became a part of this work because we had the privilege of kind of donating one of our barges, Tongkang, to the floating hospital work, and converting that into the first ever floating hospital, like that of a Type C hospital on land, but basically on water. And so doctorSHARE, it started very much as a curative medical effort, because Dr. Lee himself is a surgeon. But along the years, this past decade, since I've been a part of it, we've been focusing a lot on preventive care. So a lot of things that are to do with maternal and child health, stunting, tackling maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates. There's various programs like Clubfoot. We detected that there's a lot of children with clubfoot disability that, actually the prevalence is so high. It's like one in every 50 kids have clubfoot. And that's something that you can actually prevent if you detect it below 2 years old and give this child basically an opportunity to walk normally. And so these are the kinds of programs that we try to do through our floating hospital and our medical program in doctorSHARE.
Yeah. One last thing before I turn over to Marissa. What accomplishment, what happened last year with the government in the floating hospital?
Yeah, when we first envisioned this floating hospital barge, which is, by the way, the first ever in Indonesia and the world, again, there was nothing like it. So we didn't have any regulation to kind of say, this is rumah sakit. We had to really work at it, work on the advocacy side and kind of proving to the government that this is rasmi, this can be certified as a hospital. But to do that, we had to really prove through years of work and consistency, and knocking on doors, even though government changes every 4 years in here in Indonesia. But by God's grace, he put the ducks all aligned, and we were able to literally get klasifikasi baru di pemerintahan, which is a new classification of laws of what is a floating hospital, and create an entire classification, and then actually get a permit to run as an official hospital that would be able then to reimburse BPJS. And that was always sort of the goal, to kind of loop it back into the system that's already existing, because we know that ultimately healthcare is the responsibility of the government, but we've always worked as a partner in that sense. So praise God for that. Again, we're the first to do it. There's a lot of learning on the ground through failing and going and failing and going, but we're hoping that that would sort of open up more doors so that island regions can see floating hospitals as a way to provide healthcare.
Wonderful, wonderful. Julia, thank you, thank you, thank you. Marissa, I'm going to turn it over to you. Over the last couple of months, this is our third session, and Resource Global gets to host this wonderful session with you guys. But over the last couple of months, this group has been exploring the theological framework of faith and work. And for some here, it's a new way of thinking. And for you, a lot of times, is you and I chatted back in the day in New York. You attended Redeemer Presbyterian Church. Catherine Leary Alsdorf, who wrote the book, Every Good Endeavor, always mentioned to me when we were first starting a cohort that I needed to meet with you. What was your aha moment when you were in New York learning about this for the first time?
Yes, thank you for asking. Yeah, so that time in New York I moved there when I was 22, and yes, I had this job at Lehman Brothers. And what was interesting, what I didn't realize at the time when I took the job, was that I actually had somehow subconsciously made this job a core part of my identity. So I felt actually quite proud of working at this bank. It was kind of a top bank, nice marble floors, nice offices, and I was quite proud of myself. So when the bank filed bankruptcy in 2008, it was within a few months of my joining full time. And what happened was this bank that had been around for over 150 years basically disappeared overnight. And so then, onward went the 2008 financial crisis, which affected the whole global economy. But for myself, I was trying to figure out my identity, because suddenly I was no longer at Lehman Brothers. I was at another bank. It was taken over by Barclays. And I don't know, in my head, I didn't think it was as good. And, and also the culture changed really drastically overnight. It went from being people helping each other to suddenly I would see adults, grown men crying in the office, just because of all the trauma, all the things that were happening, and losing their job suddenly. And it just went from, a great working situation to a really hard one. And I spent many days going to the bathroom and just crying, like just going to the bathroom stall where nobody could see me and just quietly crying, because I just had so much grief to mourn over that loss. But in that time, I was going to this really great church, and they had a whole center on faith and work, and they were doing really excellent work in helping young people like us figure out what it means to bring faith into our day-to-day work. And they even had a whole small group dedicated to people in the finance industry. And so I started to realize that if I keep my identity in my work, then the next time there's a big failure, or the next time my work disappoints me, my world's going to shatter again. And so then that's where Jesus started to show me, okay, Marissa, you have to put your identity in me alone. So anchoring myself in Christ, and that's something I'm still working out. It's not a perfect journey, but as I continue to keep my anchor in Him, it really frees me to then work from that, and not to work for purpose, but to work from a sense of purpose in Christ. So that was kind of my aha moment. I mean, it was many moments, it took many months, but that was my aha season.
Yeah. Julia, when was your aha moment in terms of this whole faith and work conversation? When did it suddenly, it makes sense. I can see it.
Yeah. For me, it was actually about half a year working in New York as well. And at that time, I had a design job right at the heart of New York City, the dream job, you would call it. And then I got that phone call about my father being sick back home, and it was concurrently as he was asking me to help him find Dr. Lee. It was also the season where I wasn't sure if I was going to get my visa to continue working beyond the year, because in the US, you have to have sort of the H-1B visa, right, as an international student. My company applied, but that year they decided to do a lottery system. So I had the peace, though, that God was going to, open the right doors for me. But I was discerning where to go. And at that time, because of this whole pursuit of looking for the floating hospital ministry, I thought that God wanted me to go to Africa and serve at Mercy Ship, which is the largest floating hospital ministry in the world. It's a Christian nonprofit. And I was quite sure that that would be sort of the path God wanted me to go. But I prayed and I really wrestled with God about that decision, because it would be 1 year away from my family as well. And it was during that prayer process that God really challenged me about my privilege and my context, like that, my giftings, my talents, which God has given me to that point. But not just that, but also the fact that I was born into a family of privilege. I could go to school. My family could afford me the life that I have. I was born in Kemayoran, but not in the slums. I was born to a family of privilege. And I was born in Indonesia. And so even though I left when I was very young because of the whole 98 economic crisis, I was born in Indonesia. And I think God helped me to make sense of that. And I realized that he didn't give me all these things for just a random reason, but the privileges I have, the fact that my family business is also in maritime, and not everyone can say that their family owns boats, right, and ships. And I think that started to sort of shape an understanding that he didn't give me all these things, for which half of them I did not even earn on my own, simply not for me only or my family to enjoy, but actually was for those that he loves, which he mentions quite often in the Bible: the poor, the orphaned, the forgotten, the disenfranchised. And it was sort of this vision where I was this little girl in a playground, and I have everything that I have, beautiful clothes and toys, and it was this gated playground. And basically, is my God the kind of God that say, Julia, just keep playing in your own playground, you don't have to worry for all those kids that have nothing compared to you outside? Or is my God telling me, you go outside those gates and you share and you go with them, and that what you have, what you've been blessed with, to share it with them? And I think our God is the latter. So for me, that was like a moment of clicking to realize that even though I don't have everything figured out, but it was clear that everything that I have, my resources, my family, my context, was given for a greater purpose than just to serve myself. But I think beyond that moment, it was like a moment of stepping into faith, to the calling of, okay, Lord, I'm going to go back to Indonesia and build this floating hospital with my family. But more than that, I think the journey was very long. Making sense of faith and work very much had to do with Resource Global actually coming into the picture, Tommy, because I came back to Indonesia 2014, and I remember, like, even our church hasn't figured this faith and work conversation out. But we were very hungry to understand, what does implementing faith and work, like our faith in our work, look like tangibly? And I think Resource Global has been a tremendous factor in helping me understand that through the past 10 years. So yeah, that's for me.
Thank you, Julia. Marissa, I'm going to go over to you. Share a little bit about a specific leadership decision. I mean, you and I talked about you had to make a bunch of those things during COVID season, but share a specific leadership decision where following Christ cost you or your company money, opportunity, influence, reputation. Talk a little bit about what happened during one of those times.
Thank you. This is an interesting one, because there are, I'm still learning how to balance it all, and what does it look like to really follow Jesus. I think in Indonesia, and specifically, it's a very unique context, and context does really matter. And so navigating that in Indonesia can be hard. I think maybe some examples I can give to answer your question is in the area of sustainability. There are times where we invest in either a new factory building. There's one specific time I can share. About 10 years ago, we built a green building. So it was in Central Java, and it was the first factory building to get this global green certification. And we were able to get the highest score in the whole world. And however, it cost 4 times the amount of a normal factory. So it was much more money that we needed to put up front. But we weren't just looking at getting a financial return. I think what we were looking at was seeing, okay, we're doing something for the country. We're helping to say, hey, Indonesia is also a sustainable place to manufacture, that we have really great factories. It's not just this, the clothing industry is not just sweatshops. It's kind of an American term that's quite derogatory, but they can be great places to work. And then we saw that, the people that worked on this project, it took several years. And a lot of the people, both some of our expats and our locals, learned so much about best practices and sustainability. And then we saw the communities in Central Java around the factories just really blossoming. And so even till now, it's hard to say, did we make a financial return, but we can just see so many intangible benefits and how it has really, it has really helped the overall thriving of our people and our communities where we work.
Yeah. Before I go to Julia, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. During COVID, you actually had to make some tough decisions with your employees, which cost a lot of money. Talk to me a little bit about that, creditors, debt, all of those things. Talk about some of those situations.
It's amazing, Tommy, because as I was thinking and praying over these questions, you're tracking down the exact line of thought that I was reflecting on. So it's neat how God works. Anyway, COVID was hard. I mean, it was 2020, and we, the beginning of 2020, we started to hear our customers say, "Stop making clothing. We don't know what's happening in the world. Malls are shutting down everywhere. Stop making clothing." But here we have 30,000 people. And they want to work and they are able to work, and we're not just going to send them home. So that was really hard because our business volume, our sales went down by 35%. And like I said, in some cases, there was just little work to do. So we worked with the Kemenkes, the health ministry, and we said, hey, can we make hazmat suits for you? Can we make masks? I mean, we were just trying to find any kind of work to keep people employed, because we knew that for our Indonesian employees, just having a stable income during such a tough time like COVID was really important. Even with that, we saw, because we did have some days where, we didn't have enough work to do. And so some people, we heard that some of our factory workers were taking on additional jobs at night, just to help their families that were going through COVID. And so that was really hard. But from the top leadership, I was really grateful that there was a sense of sacrifice. There was a sense of willingness to lead by example, and to kind of have a more tangible sense of servant leadership. So that from the top leadership, we all took a pay cut of 35%. And that lasted about a year and a half. And then all the way down through middle management. But then for the workers, we tried our best possible not to touch their salary so they could have their monthly income. And so this was one way that we were able to sustain as many jobs as possible. And I was very grateful to say that with social distancing and creating safer workspaces, we were actually able to keep our factories open. So we didn't have to close more than the normal holidays and the normal off days. So that was really great. But God really, he really showed us step by step. I mean, I remember it was like a day by day figuring out, okay, Lord, what do we do? How do we take care of people well? And we don't want to compromise their health, but they also need their monthly salary. So credit goes to God for helping us figure that out.
Well, Marissa and Julia, and a lot of times those who are there, is you wish life was black and white. You wish like there was a blueprint. A lot of times there isn't. A lot of times you have no idea where you're going. When the Israelites crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land, they didn't know what was going on. I bet you some of them was sitting there, hey, we've been in this desert for 40 years. Let's just stay in the desert. We get food every single day, and man, it's not the best food, but hey, look, well, let's stay there. And so a lot of times, even going into the Promised Land, you just don't know where to go. And that's where God says, hey, look, follow the Ark of the Covenant, in Joshua chapter 3, because you don't know where you're going. And that was just an encouragement as I heard your story. Julia, for you, a lot of times, talk to me a little bit about, you started the fountain, and I know a lot of times you've recently transitioned from there, but why did you start the fountain? And what was that?
Yes, the Fountain Wellness was something I started about maybe a year before COVID. It's a boutique wellness house. We do massages, basically, reflexologies, and the heart was I wanted to work with women. I wanted to empower women who don't have education and provide them with a dignified employment, that they would have skills to be able to thrive in a hospitality industry, as we see Indonesia being such a promising place for that. And I always tell my team that it isn't creating more massage places, because I told them there's enough of that. But it was never about making another one just like another one, but the how and the why made all the difference. And I think we were very intentional about ensuring that we create a place where people felt valued, and the ethics, and as again, we all know massage can be a very taboo place, but we wanted to ensure how we did it, the DNA of our place really reflected transparency and a place where people can trust and safe. But the fountain was a journey. It started with a hope of wanting to make a difference, Lord, in that sense. But I actually transitioned out of the fountain about December last year, so not too long ago. I closed it down with a very heavy heart, but also with a lot of peace. I think through the fountain, I learned a lot about my identity in Christ as well. I think I can resonate with Marissa about the difficult times of COVID, because you can imagine we're a massage industry. A year into it, less than that, COVID happened. So we were the first industry that had to shut down, because we were like touching obviously people's bodies. And it was very difficult because we were just getting traction, and suddenly we had to shut everything down. We had to immediately pivot to a new way of earning money. I think most of our competitors literally just shut down. They closed the whole cabang and the branches just to cut losses. But very similar to Marissa, we knew that that paycheck, that payroll they had, week to week was important for them. And we thought to ourselves, if it's so difficult even for us right now, like my husband and I, we just got married at that time and we were feeling the pinch. What more for our employees who are earning at a very different level of income? So we decided to in faith continue opening and pivot to a home service. Even though there weren't many customers, we had to rebuild understanding and confidence to our customers, what it looked like to be someone that's transparent and open in running this business, but also paying the paycheck out of our own pocket for a certain number of months, and just in faith, trusting that God will, be faithful also in His way and providing for us. And I think our employees really appreciated that. And we were able to retain pretty much everybody. So when things got better and home services sort of did pick up over time, and we were able to create new channels of revenues, it did pay off. But I think a lot of it was when I was closing this fountain down in December, life had changed a lot. I became a mother of two in that span of 6 years. And in the midst of many of my responsibilities, I think, Marissa, you have more kids than me, so I don't know how you also juggle different responsibilities. But it was very clear to me last year when I had my second child that balls are starting to drop everywhere, and the people facing the most out of it was my kids, and so I knew I had to let go of something. I just didn't know what, and it was a very difficult process discerning out of all these things that I have in my calling and my work, which would it be. And I think the story of Mary and Martha really resonated because I really asked about my identity, again, very similar to Marissa, which is, if this was taken away from me, what would I worry the most? So at that time, when I confronted each one of them, and specifically the fountain, if the fountain really sad that I couldn't pursue the calling that God had it for me, which is to empower these women, which is very true. But at the same time, it was actually very much to do with my reputation, just like Martha. And she was very much concerned. She was, if you remember the passage in Luke, Mary and Martha, Martha was so concerned about being a good host. And so she was quite bitter at Mary and even Jesus for, the fact that Mary didn't help her. And she was telling Jesus, Mary that didn't do this. And it became more about her being a good host rather than actually Jesus who she was serving. And I think for me, I realized that I have been more concerned, I think, more about my reputation of someone who can do a business that thrives, and actually in front of my father, who I very much love and respect, fearing of what judgment might come from him or what he might say about the fact that if I were to close the fountain down. And I think when I realized that, it gave so much freedom to realize that God didn't die on a cross for me to live my life in this kind of fear, in this kind of way. And it brought a lot of closure in the fact that God was good and his mission still will continue with or without me. And praise the Lord, we were able to transition pretty much all of our employees to another massage brand that shared the same value, the same faith. And it was, the kind of ending that was as good as it could get. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. Marissa, a lot of times is Marissa and Julia, we have about 10 minutes left now. I'm going to switch over to Q&A. Let's talk about one topic a lot of times. As female leaders, Marissa, I'll start with you. What unique challenges do you still face as followers of Christ in the workplace, Singapore, Indonesia? What challenges do you still face as a female leader?
Thanks for asking this question. There are two that come to mind. The first one I learned to start wrestling with before having kids. And that was that, God in Genesis, he makes Adam and Eve, male and female in his image, but he makes them different. There are differences between males and females. And so I think early in my 20s, it was a lot of figuring out, okay, what are the strengths and weaknesses that I have that are different from my male counterparts, and how do I complement them well? And so that's something that I'm still figuring out. I haven't figured that all out, but it is a working out of humility and figuring out, okay, sometimes it is better that as long as the goal gets accomplished, it doesn't matter if I get credit, for example, and you were touching on this with Mark, but I'm still learning that part. The other lesson is after having kids. So we have 3 children, and I am expecting one more in about a month. So I thankfully have a very supportive husband, and I am, still in Asia. So I have the opportunity to have help and great weather. And anyway, so it makes having kids easier. But before I had kids, I used to look at women who were like working moms and think like, wow, like you can do it all. This is great, And then as I've gotten into it and journeyed down this path and spoken to other working moms, we realized that it's actually really hard to do it all well and to do all these things at the same time, because we only have 24 hours in a day. And so I think for me, it's been learning what is the season that I'm in and how do I focus on how to best use those 24 hours in the season. So for example, in the next month, I'm about to have another baby. What are the things that I need to really focus on during this time? And that means saying no to some other things that are also good and also important. But I think what has helped me is the Proverbs 31 woman. So some of you, if you haven't read through it, maybe read it again. But we see this woman taking care of her household. She's making investments. She's doing business. And I used to think, wow, she can really do it all. But then as I contemplated that scripture and talked with other people, you realize it doesn't necessarily say she did it at the same time and in the same season. So it's quite possible that she did all these things over her lifetime. So I think as a female leader, it's learning to have a long-term view and a long game kind of perspective to really help discern and to really invite, as we've spoken about this whole morning, inviting Jesus and the Holy Spirit to help us figure out what is it that I need to do today, this week, this month. So those are my 2 learnings that I'm still figuring out.
Very good. What about yourself as a female leader, Julia?
Yeah. I think a lot of things that you mentioned, Marissa, really resonated with me as well. I do think that there's a lot more to juggle. And oftentimes, I'll be honest, even with my husband, who's also working, both of us are working parents. I've had to really sometimes like communicate with him that yes, my role, my first responsibilities is a mom. And that is something I love, and that's something that's not like a chore to me. But I do have to sometimes tell him I'm also working. I also have responsibilities in my workplace, and sometimes that means just greater understanding and the fact that there's a lot to juggle. And sometimes, we're all with different love languages, right? But I think just being seen, being affirmed, to know that, hey, it's been a hard week juggling between both roles, different hats. Like I'm working a lot from home, so I'm very thankful for that. But a very serious, stressful work call, and then you have a screaming child who's a 4-year-old, right? I think Marissa can relate, and I have to immediately switch hats into being the disciplinarian and the one that address and sit down with my 4-year-old child with love and patience, and it's sort of that switching of roles that is required as a mom, which I think I shouldn't say this to overgeneralize, but most husbands who are working outside of the house don't know that. The challenge is really switching back and forth. But I think a lot of times actually it starts with my spouse, my husband, to have him understand the challenges of working. But also on another front, as I'm sitting in a board position as well, in an Indonesian nonprofit, which, by the way, I am the youngest board member in this yayasan, and I'm a female. I do sometimes feel like overlooked, if that makes sense, Tommy. It's almost like, so even though I have the same position as the other male counterparts who are much older, but if I sit in a room, I do feel that I'm overlooked very clearly because of the way the conversation goes. And I think the way I respond to that is, put me there, like I have to kind of voice out myself a little more to make myself more heard. But I'm here because you placed me here. So it's almost this sort of assuring thing that there's nothing to prove to anyone. And more clearly and confidently about the various things that God has placed in my heart. I think it's discerning with that spirit that God has given me versus sort of allowing what the expectation is. So it's like, I guess the norm would be like, oh, I have to make myself known, I have to make myself heard, but I trust that God will make my voice heard when the time comes for it. And there's no need to feel insecure or feel like, oh, how come they didn't, kind of show me the same kind of respect, because it's very easy, like as if I'm the secretary, because of my age and my gender, in a room full of very old men, Asian men. So it's just interesting to kind of notice that, but also feeling like, Lord, I'm here because you put me here. So I'm very thankful for that. And there's no way I need to prove to anybody of my worth because you've made me worthy to be there. So I think that's been very helpful in this journey.
Yeah. Hey, Marissa, Julia, a lot of times it reminds me of an interview I just did with one of our mutual friends, Ilaria Chan, and she's also in Singapore. And so she's on the Stanford Advisory Council. And she was telling me exactly that story, that she had gone to a meeting at one time, and it was a bunch of older men, and she walked in, and immediately the first thought that they had is, are you here to take notes? Or are you here to take my lunch orders? And she says, I automatically just want to scream. And I'm sitting there, no, why in the world do you assume that I'm here to take your lunch orders and take notes? And then I had to stop myself. Am I going to get really angry during this period of time? Or do I just have to sit there and know I worked hard to get to where I am right now? And I just cannot let it bother me. And I'm just going to do my job because I know what I was able to accomplish. And it's just a change of perspective that you have to have, which is tough. A lot of times is, hey, look, even in America, I see a lot of times as an Asian man compared to those who are Caucasian. I can see the difference as well, too, even being in America. So I could definitely understand where you guys are coming from. Hey, look, I'm going to switch over to Q&A. I've gotten some Q&A from different people as well too. One question I automatically got, and Marissa, I'm going to go over to you, is you mentioned a lot of times not knowing the decisions that you have to make. Do you ever get scared? I mean, life is not, I mean, you don't know if you're going to make the right decisions or where I go with the decisions. How do you deal with fear? What does it mean to trust in the Lord but deal with fear and make the best decisions?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I guess it's just walking daily with Jesus. And, I think when these fears come in, it's probably a good signal that like, oh, I might be drifting a little bit away. I might, because Jesus says, remain in me and then I will bear fruit through you. And so when I start to see fear creeping in or other things, I'm realizing, oh, maybe I'm not spending enough time with my first relationship that I should be cultivating, my first love. And so that's key, is bringing him in. So I sometimes fear and like uncomfortable feelings. I think for a long time, I still don't like those feelings, but in a way, they give us a message, that, hey, we need to deal with something either inside of ourselves or outwardly. The other thing about figuring out what to do and having peace when we don't know the answer is, there are a couple scriptures that really remind me that, okay, everything belongs to God. There's a few Psalms that says, there's one Psalm in particular that says the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. So that means that he made everything. He made all the ingredients, all the raw materials that we use to build our businesses. He also made me, meaning he made my brain, my intellect. He put me in a certain family and certain schools and certain relationships and certain communities that I really didn't have much of a choice over. And so he really has set up the resources for the business, the resources for me, and I belong to him, business belongs to him. And so I don't have to stress so much if things don't go well, because it all belongs to him, and he's going to figure it out. He knows how it all works. He knows the end of the story. So that's where I think, as I've learned to trust in that reality, that not only is he in control, but everything belongs to him, that even if the worst case scenario happens, and sometimes I do think through that, like, how would I respond? What really helps me is just remembering that he's totally in control and everything belongs to him, so I can sleep well at night.
Yeah. Julia, I have another question is, who influenced you growing up? Who were some of your role models and that really helped you become the person you are today?
Oh, okay. I don't think there is one particular person that kind of did it all, but it was very much a collection of people that God has placed. But I didn't grow up in a Christian household. From my parents, I learned about hard work and diligence. And from actually Jesus, I learned about the fact that my life is not mine. And I think encountering him in college was obviously the biggest thing that happened in my life, and everything that I wanted, or I thought I wanted, kind of was flipped upside down. And even coming back to Indonesia wasn't part of the plan. I think I thought I had the world at my fingertips upon graduation and thought I could go anywhere I wanted with my credentials and my expertise. But he brought me back to a country I thought I would not come back for a while, which is Indonesia. Again, I left when I was about 8 years old, because God loves Indonesia, and he shared that burden to me. And as hard as it is to live here, because we all know, because we're from here, most of us in this room, we know the struggles of being an Indonesian and living in the context of Indonesia's situation. It's sometimes like a love and hate relationship, but I think continue to be reminded of why we are called to be where we are, and the fact that we have all that we have. And I would like to think that a lot of us here in this room do have a certain level of talents, giftings, resources to which we can use to be a blessing for the people here in Indonesia, and to lead in a manner that really reflects God. I think that gives a sense of purpose to remain here, to continue to do the work, even though it's sometimes discouraging. But I think I would say actually the past 5, 6 years, my husband has been a great inspiration. He has been someone who really lives out his faith as his work. And so I've learned a lot from him in just what it means to actually not being afraid to actually share the gospel in the context of our work. So, one of the things that has shocked me in a good way was how he's able to actually share his faith and his values in a very public, secular setting through his work, which I think is very rare here in Indonesia. But to really bring the glory back to God and to be able to share through the different decisions you make, the small ones that people don't see, right? Like between, if you do this, you'll get more money, but you're crossing lines. But, choosing not to cross those lines and probably facing the repercussions of that, losing the project, not getting it, but because we're confident of the God who provides, and because everything belongs to Him. So we don't have to feel afraid if we don't do what everybody else does, because that's the norm here in Indonesia. And seeing that through His faithfulness and seeing the fruits of that, so I'm very, very thankful to witness that myself and being able to be challenged on my own end as well in the way I work. So I would say actually my husband's been a pretty wonderful inspiration for me, especially
Very
in the faith
good.
and work front.
Well, we have the last couple of minutes, Julia, and I'm going to end with Marissa as well too. Final encouragements for the people here. What is your word of encouragement as we continue to really be able to serve the Lord in everything that we do? Last final words from you, Julia, and then we'll wrap it up with Marissa.
Yeah, I think for me, I'm in a season where actually I still feel so unworthy sometimes to be in the leadership positions that I'm in. For example, in doctorSHARE, I sit as one of the highest board member, and I often ask God, like, Lord, why would you put me here? Because I feel so honestly not ready, don't feel like I'm the right person in terms of credentials. There's so many more people He could have picked. But I think trusting that if God calls, He will equip. I've been through this road before where He called me to build a floating hospital. And then I also feel this sense of insecurity. Lord, like, why me? And I stuck it out and I just remain. And when the floating hospital boat was eventually done and it's now sailing, there's a sense of, well, Lord, you can use very ordinary people to do extraordinary work because you're extraordinary. And it's just such a wonderful sort of honor to be used by God in that way. But will it be easy? No, it will not be. So I guess for those of you who are feeling kind of lost, unworthy, and feeling like, God, did you really call me to do this? And it feels like much bigger than what you can handle. Just know that you have a big God. We have a big God who does extraordinary things with ordinary people, and He will be faithful in this time, and He will be faithful to equip you, just as I'm preaching that to myself now. And yeah, I think as living in Indonesia, there's often sort of the norm practice, right? But I think being a Christian leader, I do feel that we're called to a higher standard of living and life. And I think the wonderful thing is that when we can kind of overcome the fear of what society kind of makes us fear about, like the inconvenience, right? Like, for example, we drive a car and we break a few laws, and for example, kita ditilang. Do we pay for convenience or do we not pay? Then we face inconvenience. It's like if we can get over sort of the fact that it's okay to be inconvenienced, it's okay to go through the longer route, then I think it will become a habit over time, and we can learn to know that God is faithful to provide when we make these steps of faith. And I mean, our God is so gracious that He doesn't count those wrongs, but He does hope that we would one day rise above that, and we will experience that joy as well. So the small wins really do matter in the big scheme of things. So that's kind of my last words.
Very good, Julia. Marissa, you want to wrap us up? Final encouragement, final words for this?
Well, I have a quick thing on being pulled over in Jakarta. I remember one of my first years there, I got pulled over and the guy was like, I want 50,000. I was like, that's okay. You can just take my license. It's fine. I don't have 50,000. And then he was like, oh, and I said, yeah, it's okay. He's like, well, you'll have to go down to the courthouse later or the police station. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'll just do that, because I had my American license still. So I figured I can get an Indonesian one again soon. And then eventually he's like, oh, okay. And then he just let me go. So if you do get pulled over and they ask for 50,000 or 100,000, they might let you go. So in any case, but coming back to more serious matters, thank you, Julia, for sharing that, because that really resonates with me too, of just like wondering why and what am I doing here, God? And so it's so nice to know there's another sister who, is walking through that. But for me, I'd like to leave you all with two scriptures that I lean on heavily. The first one is 1 Thessalonians 5:17, which is one of the shortest verses. Pray without ceasing. So that's 1 Thessalonians 5:17. And that's just, bringing Jesus into the day to day. Sometimes there have been days that are so hard, and you might need to talk to him every minute, or every hour, or set a reminder on your phone to pray for this person. There have been times where I would use my car ride home to forgive people that I work with, because I would get so angry or so offended or so frustrated that I would take my car ride home or my commute home to just, okay, Jesus, I forgive this person. I release that person, and just do that, even if I didn't feel like it. So just pray continuously. And the second scripture is Proverbs 16:9, that in a man's heart, he plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. So as we think about our future, as we think about this year's plans, whether it's in the business or our family or personal life, as you think about what you want in 5 years or 10 years, all the hopes and dreams, just remember that Jesus is our good shepherd, and and we have a good Father in heaven who is helping direct all of our steps. So even as we make whatever plans, he's in charge. It all belongs to him. And Tommy, like you said, just follow that Ark of the Covenant every day, even if you don't know where you're going. So thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Marissa, Julia, thank you. And a couple of things for those who are there who are older leaders. Look, one of the things that we need to do is we continue to really be able to empower these younger leaders, encourage them, challenge them, come alongside with them, give them opportunities to learn, to speak, sit under their leadership. Your words mean a lot to them. And I look at people like Marissa or Julia or some of the people I get a chance to work with, Resource Global. They are very, very talented, but they do need this older generation to come alongside with them to really be able to continue to encourage them and speak truth into them. And for those who are, especially for the female leaders, or those who are men, let's encourage them. Let's continue to really be able to build them up. Let's really be in their corner and allow them to really be able to experience what it means to really be able to lead. So thank you, Marissa, Julia, for all of those things. I love both of you guys. It is an honor, and I appreciate your friendship.
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Julia.
Tommy. Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Well, before I bring in Colin Hanson over here, I have one announcement that they wanted me to say is the Faith and Work Pre-Conference Seminar is a series of seminars held in the lead up to the Faith and Work Conference in 2026. This seminar series has been held 3 times and is hosted by 3 workplace ministries. Thank you for all those guys who hosted it. The Workplace Institute of Nusantara, also known as WIN, was entrusted to host Seminar Series 1 in November 2025. Seminar Series 2 was hosted by Grace Alone Ministry in January 2026, and currently now Resource Global is holding the 3rd one. For those, number 1, I apologize if I said it incorrectly. Nusantara, known as WIN, Nusantara. I want to make sure I show honor and respect to that particular ministry. And on May 16th, we will hold the peak event of the Faith and Work Conference 2026 in Jakarta. Couple lineup of speakers who have been used mightily by God include Kara Martin, co-chair of the Theology of Work project and adjunct professor with Gordon College Theological Seminary. She has worked in media, communications, human resources, business analysis, all of those things. Some of her books include Worship, How to Use Your Work to Worship God and Keeping Faith, How Christian Organizations Can Stay True to the Way of Jesus. And for those, IG is faithandwork.id, faithandwork.id. And if those guys are interested, we need your support to ensure the success of this event and its broad impact. We invite you to support us in prayer, to participate in the offerings, and also to support with your time, support with your money. These guys are doing great work. It is an honor for me to be part of this group, to be part of this bigger group. Please, please, please consider supporting this wonderful ministry. And thank you very much for all that you guys are doing. And with that said, we head into our next speaker. Colin, how are you, Colin?
I'm doing well, Tommy. Thanks for having me. It's really just an honor to be here and to be part of such a fascinating global event.
Colin, I know you're in Birmingham, Alabama. What time zone are you in?
I'm in the Central Time Zone. Just haven't experienced daylight savings time last
Yeah,
week.
very good. Hey, Colin, for those, I think a lot of times people are familiar with a lot of your work, but for those who aren't familiar, share a little bit what you do.
Sure. So I serve as the vice president for content as well as the editor-in-chief at the Gospel Coalition. We're a ministry that has a global reach, but is primarily based out of North America. And we've been around for a little over 20 years. Don Carson and Tim Keller were our two
Yeah.
co-founders, working with other pastors such as John Piper and other church leaders around the world, places like Reformed Theological Seminary partners with. And then I also serve as the executive director of the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics, which I launched with Tim Keller shortly before his death. So I do a lot of other writing and fun things, but those are my primary responsibilities.
All right, before all of this, and you were a student at Northwestern University in Chicago, what did you think you were going to do?
What did I think I was going to do? Well, I thought I would be a pastor, so it's
Mm-hmm.
probably not what most people go to Northwestern in Chicago to do. I thought maybe there's a possibility I would be a journalist, covering sports or covering
Yeah,
politics. It's a good journalism school, so that was a
yeah,
primary reason that I went. And what I then picked up early on was a degree in history as well, European history. So there was a possibility I'd go the academic route. So there were a lot of different roads, and it was not easy to discern exactly where the Lord was leading over time. And it's been a bit of a winding journey since then as well.
Well, for today's conversation, we're going to talk about a book that you wrote called Timothy Keller. Talk a little bit about how that book came into making.
Yeah, so I first started working with Tim Keller, editing books going all the way back to 2008. Then I started working for him at the Gospel Coalition in 2010. And then when he had stepped aside later on with his retirement from Redeemer Presbyterian Church in 2017, later on I then became the vice president at the Gospel Coalition, which he had served in that position then before. And then when, of course, we got the really terrible diagnosis about his pancreatic cancer, that was 2020 into 20, and then yeah, it was in 2020. And I remember asking him, is somebody writing about you and about your life and about your ministry while you can still give interviews and you can still
Yeah,
give feedback, you can still engage? And I found out no one was doing that. And so I suggested that he should do that. And I said, it doesn't need to be me. Here's what I would do if I were you, but it doesn't need to be me who does this. But he and his wife Kathy decided to then ask me to work on that book, and so I had permission to talk to their friends and their family. I
yeah,
talked to people like Tim's only living immediate family member, his sister, that he grew up with. Talked about, I mean, all sorts of different things, and had looked at some files and things like that that people had never looked at before, some old artifacts from his student days and things like that. But the main thrust of the book is that Tim was always somebody who was drawing on other people's what he was learning from people, a constant lifelong learner. So it's telling the story of Tim Keller, but through the eyes of the people who had influenced him, and as he grew as a lifelong learner, really up until the very end of his life in 2023.
yeah. Hey, Colin, as you work on the book, what were your impressions of Tim before when you worked on the book and you just started meeting him? And what were your impressions of Tim after you finished the book?
Tommy, I had a really scary realization early on in the book process. I remember it at the beginning of 2021. And there's a saying, it's popular in the United States. I don't know how many other places it's popular, but the saying is you should never meet your heroes.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to get to know the people too well that you look up to, the people who are your mentors. And I thought, I'm going to have to ask people a lot of hard questions about him. And I just don't know what they're going to say. Not everybody in our workplace, not everybody in ministry is somebody you'd necessarily want to look up to when you know that much about their lives. I mean, I knew him to be a man of incredible intelligence, a man of incredible integrity. Um, I was really amazed going through the process that the people who were closest to him were not necessarily impressed with him, but in a good way. They saw him as a real human being who was very much in need of God's grace, somebody who was willing to ask for forgiveness, somebody who was willing to ask for help, somebody who was not full of himself, who was not full of pride. I also was struck just in terms of his contributions that while he was often crediting other people for his insights, what really stood out to me is how he uniquely brought things together that no one else had brought together before. So, I mean, he's drawing from all these different places, but really contributed uniquely in this synthesis of drawing them together. A last thing, and this is a fascinating thing to ponder in whatever workplace we're in, it's the nature of leadership. Tim would describe to me that he didn't think he was a very good leader. And when you look at all the things that he'd accomplished from planting Redeemer Presbyterian Church and its
Mm-hmm.
growth and Redeemer City to City and its global church planting reach that I'm sure some people here are familiar with, it just blows you away. How could somebody like that not be a good leader? Well, what I came to understand is that he was not a very gifted administrator.
Yeah.
And that is an important part of leadership, but not everybody has that gifting. And I really think, Tommy, about 1 Corinthians 12. As a passage I go back to a time and time again about the body of Christ and how every part is important. And even it's the lesser parts that have the greater honor in the body of Christ. And so one of the things that stood out to me about why he was a good leader was because he would ask for help when things went wrong, when things blew up on him, when his administrative capabilities were overwhelmed. He was willing to ask his friends, I really need you to come in here and clean up my messes. He didn't pretend to be somebody that he wasn't, and that humility stood out and made me actually admire him more, even when I saw some of the mistakes that he'd made in his leadership.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a good reminder. A lot of times we need the entire body. Sometimes as pastors, especially for those who are pastors in the room, feel like we have to be good at everything. But one of the things that Tim showed is you don't have to be, and it's okay that you're not good at everything. Yeah. And Colin, the one
Yeah,
thing I also
yeah, that's
noticed,
right. Well, I think we often.
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No,
No,
go ahead.
we are off by a second. So that's something yeah, please finish your thoughts.
Now, I was going to say, often when I meet with pastors who are really well known and people know them from their preaching and they know them from their writing, I have to tell people that you should assume that they are good and gifted at the things that you see them doing. But you should not necessarily assume that they're good at everything else that you don't see them doing. Those things don't follow. Don't assume because somebody can preach and teach and write that suddenly they're just gifted in every other way. That's just not true. And that I think actually gives us confidence in the body of Christ of how necessary all of us are to the functioning of the church.
Yeah. And Colin, here's something I would love for you to speak on. The one thing I noticed about Tim is he had these New York Times best-selling books. He was always well known, well requested in speaking, but he never got caught up in himself. What does it mean for a Christian not to get caught up in themselves?
Yeah, a lot of it is the kind of friendships you have and how long you've maintained them. And that's a secondary thing. I mean, the primary thing is simply Do you believe that all that you have and all that you are is by grace? If you believe that, if you're motivated out of all of your work, why you do that work, who you do that work for, that's going to make a really big difference. This is really the core of his message that everything we do is by grace. It's motivated by that grateful response to the Lord. So it starts with that humility, but that humility then allows you to have real friendships. One thing that really stood out, and Tim wanted me to focus on this in the book, was to look back and tell the story of friends that he had, all the way from college, the best man at his wedding, to the best friends that he and Kathy had from all over these years. And best man at his wedding was actually his best friend from college. And then you have all these friends from the seminary years. And then after seminary, they moved to a small town in Virginia called Hopewell. And at Hopewell, they maintain strong friendships. And what I find fascinating, Tommy, is that when you saw his memorial service in 2023 at this amazing, the most prominent Catholic cathedral in the United States, Tim Keller could have asked anybody. He could have asked former presidents of the United States, people like George W. Bush or Barack Obama, to speak about him. But he didn't do that. The person he asked to speak about him, and really not to speak about him, but to speak about the Lord, was a man who he had led to Christ after he had been young and divorced in Hopewell, Virginia. Just a friend from his life. That just shows you that what you value is not what somebody can do, but who they are in the Lord and that love that you share. There's just evidence of that all over the place. You could add then Tim's wife, Kathy, and the close relationship they had, a relationship of honesty and of encouragement and of mutual support between them. She also did a lot to keep him humble over the years.
And what do you think most shaped Tim Keller's thinking about faith and work? Was it theology, mentors, New York City, something else? What shaped his theology?
I think, Tommy, we can look at a few different factors. One of them is simply the book of Genesis. Just looking at the first chapter, it's God's creation. It's God as a worker. It's working for 6 days and then resting. Of course, he's a Reformed theologian, and these are important aspects in Reformed theology. From there, a lot of us would recognize, if we're familiar with Tim's work, we know how big of a fan he was of J.R.R. Tolkien, the British novelist, famous for Lord of the Rings. Probably Tim's favorite short story when it came to work was one that, again, if you're not familiar with it and you're watching, you're listening now, they encourage you to go out there and find it. Find Leaf by Niggle, a short story by Tolkien, and the story, very briefly, is about an artist named Niggle, and he's trying to kind of paint this huge tree, but he's distracted in so many different ways. He's frustrated. He thinks he's never going to finish, and in the end, all he's able to do in this big tree is produce one little leaf. Now, we know that actually is a parable about Tolkien's own creative process, writing The Lord of the Rings. It's his own story about how frustrating it was. And for those of us who are familiar with Tolkien, we know one of the people that helped to encourage Tolkien, again, thinking about Keller and friendship, that was his friend C.S. Lewis in Oxford, who encouraged him. You've got to do this. This is really great. You've got to do this. So you have in Leaf by Niggle this encouragement that our work, even when we're doing our little thing right here, painting our little leaf, we don't see what God is doing, the bigger picture of how that fits into that whole big tree of what he's doing, what he accomplishes through our work. So those are a couple influences. Another would be the reformers, primarily the Lutheran stream, as well as the Reformed stream. So with Luther, and you can see so much of this come out in Tim's book on faith and work, Every Good Endeavor, written with Catherine Leary Alsdorf. But Luther's primary view of work is, you'll say, God doesn't need our good works, but our neighbor needs our good works. And so our work is how God cares for his creation. So that was a big part that Tim tapped into in terms of theology of work. And then finally, you see then this perspective that's primarily reformed about how our work is actually extending the creative work. You see this in Calvin, continuing God's creative work and actually building culture, a culture that reflects God. So that's part of Calvin. And then you also see that in Abraham Kuyper, the neo-Calvinist, jumping ahead to the 1800s and the 1900s, who was a former prime minister of the Netherlands. And Kuyper had a view, and of course, many will be familiar with him because of the long national histories there. But Kuyper's view then is that our theology indicates, it affects all of life. It's not just for church, it's not just for our personal lives, but it's applied and it's intended to change the world by God's grace. So you put all those things together, from the literary to the biblical to the Lutheran and to the Reformed. And like I said about Tim's influences, he tends to synthesize all of them together to produce something that's unique. And that would be overall Keller's perspective on vocation.
And then, Colin, there was where he lived. For all of those
Yeah.
who are listening in right now, they're all living in Jakarta, which this past
Yeah.
year the United Nations says it was the largest city in all of the world. Tim
Wow.
lived in New York City, a very influential city. Talk a little bit about how New York shaped even his own identity and understanding of faith and work.
I love that. I love that question. I love that perspective, Tommy. I mean, wherever we are, I mean, all the things that I teach, the things that I care about, the things that I invest my time in are very much shaped by the fact that I live in Birmingham, Alabama, with our history and our own urban setting. And it's no different for anybody watching here, and it's no different for Tim Keller. What's so interesting about Keller in New York is that, and I think a lot of people are familiar with some of the basics, obviously, of New York, but New York it's not like London in the sense that it's not the American capital for everything. It's not the entertainment capital necessarily for movies. Obviously, that's Los Angeles. It's not the academic capital. That's Boston. But New York, nevertheless, has a wide range of excellence. And so you could be at the top of your field in music or ballet or comedy or finance. I mean, that's a wide range, banking, things like that. And so New York has a special kind of achievement culture. And that could be because you're trying to make it on Broadway, or you're working 120 hours a week in investment banking. I mean, you're very dedicated in both those ways. And before, churches might be able to reach artists, or they might be able to reach, or they might be able to reach bankers, but they didn't reach both of them. They weren't able to reach people who shared the same commonalities in New York, this attitude that it's either New York or nowhere, or if you can make it here in New York, you can make it anywhere. And so he had to deal with that basic challenge of people who they moved to New York with this incredible ability, this incredible ambition, but for a lot of them, it didn't work. And then all of a sudden, who were they? What is their identity? What's their hope? What's their purpose? But Tommy, there was another problem, and that was the people for whom it did work. They did get all the achievement that they wanted. They did get all the money that they wanted. And they found out also that that was not fulfilling. So that's, I think, a major reason that Tim focused on a couple different points. One was idolatry, that even good things like work that we pursue become bad things when they come before God. All problems come when we violate the first commandment. You should have the Lord your God, worship the Lord alone above all else. You should have no other gods before me. So that's what was one problem. The second one is identity. That this pursuit of who you are, which we often tie so closely to what we do and what we achieve, is one that is inherently faulty. It will always fail us if we do not achieve, and even fail us when we do get what we want there. So that identity has to come out of who we are in Christ, united to Christ by faith through the gospel by the Spirit. So those are a couple ways just that New York was affecting him. I would also say that in New York there was a lot of skepticism toward Christians. And so you had to break down a lot of those barriers. And one of the ways, or a couple different ways he found to break down the barrier were number one, for Christians to work in their workplaces with excellence, but then
Mm,
also Christians to do good works in the community. So
mhm,
this was a big thing, just to wrap up. What you heard around Redeemer a lot is that Redeemer was a church for the city. In the United States, in the 1980s and 90s, evangelicals were not known as people who loved the city.
mm.
That was something that was not unique to Tim in terms of history, but in our day, somebody had probably more influence in a positive way on helping Christians to love the city than maybe anybody else. So New York was very closely tied into how he expressed his faith and how he applied it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And side note, a lot of times for those who are also listening as well too, Tim did a very good job of exegeting the city. He understood the city. He understood the problems. And for those who are sitting there, in order for you to serve the city, you have to be a student of the city. You have to be a student of Jakarta. You have to understand what makes it tick, what the problems are. And then from that point, I say, how can I serve it? Because Colin, for instance, they don't need Tommy Lee coming in who is from Chicago, going to Jakarta and says, all right, guys, because this is Chicago, I'm assuming it's a big city. This is all the things you need to learn. I have to understand the context of the city.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I mentioned earlier the different cities in the United States, different kind of character. You know, I of course lived in Chicago like you for a long time in the area, and we always talk about it's a city of broad shoulders. It's a city of hard work. It's a little bit of I mean, it's a high achieving city, but it's a gritty city. It has kind of a bit of a chip on its shoulder because it's in the Midwest. It's not New York, it's not Los Angeles. But in New York, again, it's this is the center of the universe. It's New York or nowhere. In Boston, it's you have to be high achieving in what you think. In Los Angeles, it's about how you look. Down in the South, where I live, it's about who you know. It's all about your family connections and your personal connections. And so, even in a country like the United States that has, in some ways, a pretty unified culture, you know, common language, of course, and a lot of common history, it still looks very different regionally or from city to city. And that's part of being faithful in applying the gospel is knowing some of those particular challenges and how the gospel speaks into them.
Yeah. Colin, Tim often argued that work is not just a platform for evangelism, but participation in God's creative work. Work is not just a platform for evangelism, but participation in God's creative work. What do you think he meant by that?
Yeah, so the the faith and work movement in the United States often focused on two things. Number one, personal ethics, being a good person, being an upstanding person, telling the truth and not lying about things in business. And then second, about using it as a platform to share your faith. So and also that was a sense that if you were in the workplace, you must not be as good of a Christian because the real all-star, the real gifted Christians are the ones who go into that go into Christian ministry. And so those are two things that he pushed back on quite a bit. Yes, ministry is a dignified calling. Yes, it matters that we live with integrity. Yes, we should be bold. We should absolutely be bold about telling people about Jesus. But there's also an intrinsic value in our work. One of the people, I was just writing about this today, one of the people that Tim would quote on this topic is Dorothy Sayers, her 1942 essay, Why Work? And her point is that we work unto the Lord. The work is its own end. We work for the work for the glory of God. It's not always just a means. We're not only working so that we can get money, so we can give it to Christian ministries, though that can be a good reason for work. We work because that's how God has made us to be. We work for the work's sake, in excellence, for the glory of God. And so I think what Keller's getting at there is that there's a value in doing good work because that's what God has called you to do wherever you are in whatever vocation that you're in. And I know that that's something that a lot of people do know, but a lot of people also do not know as well and need to be reminded of that. So I think that's what Tim was getting at.
Okay, so Colin, a lot of times someone would say this, if Tim was sitting here, if it means doing good work, even for a job you don't necessarily like, even for a boss you don't necessarily like, you would say?
Yeah. Well, I think that's exactly the issue that Paul addresses. He says, "You work heartily unto the Lord." And Paul says that, of course, in some pretty controversial settings, because he's talking specifically there to servants, people who are bond servants, people who are kind of selling their rights to somebody else in exchange for kind of selling their freedom in exchange for provisions there. And he's saying, even if your boss is not a very good person, you still do the right thing because ultimately the reason you live, the reason you have your being, the reason you are here is to work unto the Lord. So we don't work only when our boss is watching. We don't only work well when we're in positive circumstances. We work because God is God who calls us to do that. And I know this is pretty basic, but I find that a lot of people in the United States don't know this, that work is something that we will do into eternity, into the new heavens and the new earth. Work itself is not a result of the fall. The thorns and thistles are, but the work itself is not a part of the fall. It's something that we do. And as Tim would remind us, it's one of the things that we are most able to do with our time at lengths of time. You can't eat all the time. You can't go on vacation all the time, but you can work a lot as long as the Lord has given you those physical and mental abilities. That's part of how He designed us to be. Makes it good.
And Colin, would you also say a lot of times in the life of David, you never know what he's going to use that experience. David was stuck tending the father's sheep, and he used that experience to really be able to protect the sheep, which helped him with Goliath. You never know what that dead end, boring, monotonous job will set you in the mode for.
I mean, that David would be a great example. How about the example of Esther?
Mhm.
What a complicated and confusing situation she was thrust in. But what does Mordecai? What does he say to her? Perhaps it's for a time such as this. That's in the Lord's timing. That's not in our timing. We can't know that for sure. Our responsibility is to be faithful with whatever we have, to be faithful and available. The Lord determines how He uses us.
Yeah. Tim also engaged successful marketplace leaders without flattering them. How do you think, as in your research, how do you challenge high achievers, especially those in New York, without either condemning or idolizing success?
Well, I go back primarily then to those concepts of idolatry and identity. I think those are really important. I was just going back through C.S. Lewis's writings on the Great Divorce. Really great writings there, great little book. And you could clearly see the influence of that book on Tim Keller. You could see it actually going all the way back to the great theologian Augustine. And the challenge for those who are high achieving, who are very successful, those people, and Tim was that way himself. He worked long hours. He was very successful in what he did. He was very gifted in what he did. He had supernatural abilities that not everybody had. But he could understand and then relate to others who were high achieving because of the tendency to conflate, as I mentioned before, conflate what we do and how it's going with who we are. And Tommy, I was just thinking about this the other day. Tim would often talk about prayer, and he
Mm.
would say, if you're only praying when you need something, then it's not God that you're after. God is there to give you whatever else it is that you want. That's an insight that also comes out of Lewis's Great Divorce. And I think about that a lot because those who are high achieving tend to have goals that they see God as trying to fulfill. And they're just tempted to say that when I'm successful, then everything's okay. And when I fail, that's when I turn to the Lord because they're able to they trust in their own gifting. Um, that's a particular challenge. And I think one reason Tim connected so well in New York with people like that was because he understood that and he could use the gospel to help rescue them from that challenge and say, you know what? One of the worst things that could ever happen to you is you get everything that you want because you think you don't need the Lord. And of course, Jesus warned about this repeatedly, where it comes from the love of money or storehouses or thinking that tomorrow is promised to us. So I think those are all the different ways that Tim understood successful people. He was not flattering them, but he also respected them. He respected their dedication, he respected their gifting. He wasn't intimidated by that. He wasn't trying to tear them down. He was really trying to help them.
Yeah. Hey, even as you interview different people on the start of City to City and Redeemer and all this stuff, did Tim do this? Did he pick up on this early on, or did it evolve over time as he had to wrestle with the people at church?
That's a great question, Tommy. I think it comes out in New York in ways that I didn't see it in Philadelphia when he was at Westminster or Hopewell in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely seems to be something that's related to a desire to be able to disciple people in New York for whom their work was
Mm-hmm.
the most important thing about them. It's interesting. I don't know what it's like in Jakarta, but in Birmingham, Alabama, people do not ask me what I do. They're not
Mm-hmm.
interested in my work. It doesn't come up. When I lived in Chicago, they did. They would
Mm-hmm.
always ask me what I did for work, but they don't ask me that in Birmingham. When New York, you're there usually for, and then we're talking about Center City, Manhattan specifically. It's different in the boroughs, but in Center City, Manhattan, you're there for education or you're there for work. So that's why, people would ask those questions. So that would emerge there in different ways when he was there. And again, I think that's true of a lot of different global cities of huge influence. I'm sure it's different in different places, different parts, but those different places, because of their influence, because of their prestige, will tend to attract other people like that. So it seems like something that really came out in New York that he would then have seen reflected in so many of these other global cities, from London to Jakarta to Kuala Lumpur to Singapore to all these sorts of different places.
Side note, Colin, a lot of times as you talk with Tim is how did a person, a pastor who came from a small little church, who then moved to New York, how did he learn how to read the room so well?
Well, I think what stands out to me is a comment from Mako Fujimura. Some of you may be familiar with him as a Japanese American visual artist, a painter of some renown. He was an elder with Tim at Redeemer Presbyterian Church. And his comment was Tim was never really New York. He was still just Allentown, Pennsylvania, where he grew up. So, in some sense, he comes across in a lot of ways as the genuine insider, the New Yorker, that because that's how most of us knew him. But then again, that wasn't necessarily how people saw him there. They still felt like, oh, that's a guy from Pennsylvania, not a true New Yorker. That's always a question that comes up with them. Also, think about it, Tommy. I write about this in my book. He was not the first choice. He was not the second choice. He was the third choice for the pastor to be at that church. And in fact, there was a couple named the Kaufmans, Dick and Liz Kaufman. They were thought to be perfect for New York. They'd gone to a Harvard Business School, really hard charging, really just very much stereotypically New York. People didn't think Tim would do a good job there because they thought he's too intellectual. He's too much of a brainiac. That's not New Yorkers. That's Boston, which is, remember, where he did grad school with Kathy.
Mm,
So the thought was, no, he's not going to fit New York. He's going to talk like a professor. We don't want a professor in New York. We want somebody who's going to talk like a really self-assured banker instead. But isn't that funny, Tommy, how the Lord knows better than what we did? And in some ways, I don't think Tim was so much trying to be New York. I think he was trying to be himself as God
yeah.
had called him to be. And the Lord used that in ways that really confounded the expectations of New York.
Yeah, yeah. I want to squeeze in these two different questions before time runs out. In the marketplace, what did Tim believe were the most dangerous idols for successful leaders?
Well, I think it's definitely one thing I've mentioned a couple different times, and it's the conflating of your identity with your work. Um, like I said, I he identified with that so much. I hosted him on Election Day 2016 at Beeson Divinity School, and he gave this message here in Birmingham, Alabama. He gave a message about the dangers of ministry. But you could apply everything that he said about ministry to any job that you have. Whenever you are so dedicated to your work that you're tempted to think that everything's going well in your life if it's going well, or it's going poorly if it's not going well. He spoke to that very, very specifically. So again, it's that identity idolatry dynamic. But then another one is simply, I mean, it's money. It's no great. We don't need to complicate this anymore. Tim was a very big believer in stewardship. He was not shaming people who had a lot of money, because obviously a lot of people in New York did, and a lot of people he visited all over the world, including, again, from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur to Jakarta to all these places that Australia, all these places that he'd visited. Obviously the Lord uses those people, but there are particular temptations that come there, temptations that Jesus had warned about. And so, do you sense always that need of the Lord, or are you using the Lord to get something else? Those are the challenges. And again, they face, we all of us face them, but those who are especially dedicated and successful in their jobs have those particular have those challenges in a more acute fashion, I would think. So those are a couple different things that come to mind.
And Colin, you were probably one of the last ones who spent a lot of time with him toward the end as he faced his battle with cancer later in life, knowing that his days were limited and coming to an end. What lessons do you think he learned that you could share with us?
One thing that stands out, Tommy, is how the change that I saw in Tim, even when he had his cancer diagnosis. When I talked with him after he got this death sentence, he actually came across to me as lighter, happier, more joyful in the Lord. I don't know how many other people can relate to this in work, but I certainly can. Tim was often weighed down by working long hours and then going to bed knowing that he'd have to do it all over again. Just there was always another day of work. And so he would have this dread of having to do that. Well, the thing about pancreatic cancer is that all of a sudden he couldn't focus on tomorrow because he had no idea what was going to happen. He might be dead, he might be sick. Who knows what would happen
Mm,
tomorrow? Well, of course,
mm,
the thing is, Tommy, isn't that exactly what Jesus told us about anxiety and about worry? The next day is not promised to you. You live today in the light of Christ's love. And what's fascinating, Tommy, is that we have a former senator in the United States named Ben Sass, who's also the president of the University of
mhm,
Florida, who's an admirer of Tim Keller's. And I ran into him recently. He's also been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, but at age 54. Tim died at 72. At age
mm.
54 with three kids. And I talked with him, and it's the same dynamic with him. He may just have days, weeks, months, maybe to live, but it's the same sense of living liberated and in seeking a true experience of Christ in prayer. Again, not just asking God for stuff, but intimacy with the Lord, experiential intimacy with the Lord, the kind that we'll have when we see Him face to face, when our faith becomes sight in the new heavens and the new earth. So those are a couple different things just just stand out to me and just came through so clearly. As somebody who knew him for a long time, I could really see that change, but I realize You don't need pancreatic cancer to have that change. That's available to any of us right now.
Yeah. We only have a couple minutes left. Thank you so much for just jumping on, being with us for so long. One final question. If Tim were here addressing Indonesian business and marketplace leaders today, what will he say to them? What will he challenge them on? What will he encourage them on?
Well, it's a daunting question. It's one that I would be, I can't really claim to know exactly what that would be. I know how much Tim valued the work that the Lord is doing in this broader region. I mean, certainly Jakarta, but more broadly in that part of the world. In fact, a lot of people may not know this, but it was actually on a trip to Kuala Lumpur in 2020.
Mhm.
That's actually how Tim contracted COVID. It was 2020. It was spreading from China. There was a Wuhan group that was going to be there. That's actually, isn't this amazing though? That's how they found out early that he had pancreatic cancer. It's amazing. That's how they caught it earlier, were able to treat it and give him longer life. What an example of how the Lord works in very unexpected ways in there. But I just know Tim spoke so often about the relationship between the church in the East and the West. And he was so clear in saying that in the West, we have no reason to assume or pretend like we have all the right answers or we have the normative perspective on theology. And he would often use this not only in teaching the church, but also in apologetics to be able to puncture the arrogance of the West, as if again that our view is the default in all these different ways. And so I would just encourage church leaders in Jakarta that we in the West need to learn from you. There's so much that we have to learn from you, the ways that you contextualize the gospel in your context is not just for you, it's for us. Because as you see the gospel in these ways, you teach us other things about God that we're not seeing.
Yeah.
Tim would often use a story about Koreans. He would say, isn't it interesting that when Koreans became Presbyterians, they had a really significant question. They said, what does the Christian faith say about how to honor my parents and to honor my ancestors? And they went through the Westminster Confession, they went through Heidelberg, they went through all these different Reformed confessions, and they couldn't find anything that spoke to that question. It was a recognition that there's nothing wrong with those Western confessions, but in some ways they're incomplete because they do not address the topics that would be experienced or prioritized in other parts of the world. And so that not only, again, allows the faith, a Christian faith is always a migratory religion, but it not only allows the gospel to take root in different cultures, West and East, but once again, we learn from other regions as well. So it's an important part of Tim's ministry, not just from the West, but from the church everywhere to the church everywhere else. And so, again, I just want to encourage you guys in that way. And I just look forward to myself and others learning from you and the ways that
Yeah.
you work out your faith for years to come.
Yeah. Colin, thank you for your work on the book, Timothy Keller. Thank you for even jumping. It's midnight over at your place. It's late. Are you a late night sleeper here, Colin?
I am. More of a night owl, as we would say. I was telling my wife I was a little bit daunted after a long day of writing. I'm working on a book on C.S. Lewis right now. It's a long day
Yeah.
of writing. And my wife's like, nah, you're fine. You like to stay up late and read. So I'll probably go back and do some reading now.
Thank you. And Colin, I didn't know Tim as well as you did. I work with him in city to city. I struggle with my sinus cancer. And his last words when I saw him in Chicago was, Tommy, I heard you were sick. How are you? And it was that simple gesture that really meant so much to me. And I really appreciated his humility.
Yeah, what a great man. We miss him, and yet the Lord's work continues, and he calls us to step forward as well, just like so many are in this call.
Thank you, Colin. Hey, we'll talk soon. Have a good night. Well, here we are, and we're done. And guys, thank you so much for you were stuck with me for 2 hours. So Hopefully, a lot of times it was something that you guys were really be able to get a lot of stuff from. The one thing that really we want to do is a lot more of application, context, all of those things versus more theological framework, which you've heard in the first two sessions. A couple of things that they gave me is we're going to show you a link for the evaluation, and they're going to pull that up right now. This link is your go-to for everything. Registration for the conference, Zoom links, Google Maps, FAQ, and a rerun of this seminar will be on this link tree. And so please bookmark that as well too. We're probably gonna also send you guys off. I think with this one, you also give your feedback, exactly. This one will also give your feedback, evaluation. Please, we love to hear from you. What went well? What didn't go well? What would you like to hear better? More Q&A, less Q&A, different types of speakers, all of those things. So that is something for you guys to do. Other than that, thank you for just being on. Thank you for just your attentiveness. And I look forward to next time. I'll be back in Jakarta in June, and I would love to meet some of you guys in person. Thank you for all those guys who have joined us to make this happen. Benita and all of our speakers from Mark and Julia, Marissa and Colin, and all of the people who make this possible. I'm going to wrap us up in prayer, and then we're going to begin end this time together. So let's pray. Lord, thank you very much for all that you do. Thank you for the wonderful country of Indonesia. Thank you for the people there. Thank you for how you have worked in this country and the city of Jakarta, and we lift it up to you. Lord, we continue to pray that we are saved by grace, as Colin reminded us. We are saved by grace, and we live our life as a response to that grace. And so, Lord, may we continue to walk out. May we continue to follow after you, seeking you each and every single day. Our very presence in our work will make this place a better place for the gospel. That when they look at our lives, they see something different. When they see our attitudes, they see something different. And so we lift that up to you. In Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night and or have a good day. Rest of the Saturday. I'll talk soon.
Thank you so much, Tommy.
Thanks, Tommy.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Bye,
Tommy.
everyone.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
everyone.
for the Resource Global
Thank you,
team.
Tommy.
Thanks, everyone. It's a wrap. Hey, Benita.